Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. Good to see you all again. Mark's wife, Apostate Ann, is going to be recording another music video.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that she's going to be doing an Adam and Eve thing, and she needs to borrow my reticulated python, Jormungandr. He's going to play the serpent. So I'm
Nachash. Awesome.
Yeah,
love it.
The last music video that they did was a Spanish version of "Saved" by Shelley
Segal,
Segal, and it was very. I was surprised that it was recorded with a phone because it looks brilliant. I mean, it's a good camera on that phone.
Yeah,
it's a very good image. So I'm looking forward to doing this recording on this week. Anyway, how is everybody doing? Anybody got any opening comments?
I think I'm doing all right, except for all the stress, but that's normal. Although I am quite happy to see Kip back here.
I
been a while since
know.
we've seen
Kip is
Kip.
back
Well,
alive.
it's hard for me to make time for the show because Saturdays are usually a zoo. But listen, I really wanted to get in onto something involving the succession narrative because I've been writing about that for like a month or two. So I am happy to be here today. And the Flames are 4-0-0.
Yeah.
Is that a sports ball reference?
Yeah.
The sports puck.
Okay. Sports puck. Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to see Kip here too. Lawrence, I don't know what you're talking about as far as the stress. Although maybe because I've decided that for the rest of this month I'm going to practice alcoholism. And because on election day, I just want to see if on election day if I really need to be good at it.
That's wise. Dress for the job you want, I guess. Also, within Satanism, as a religion of indulgence, I believe you are practicing your faith, which is right and proper. And still you're right, technically. Hopefully, it'll stay your right in your wonderful, wonderful country.
My it was just Canadian Thanksgiving here last week, and I know all of you in the audience are going, it was what the hell? Yes, there's a Canadian Thanksgiving, and my dad and my stepmom were out visiting, which was very nice because they haven't been out here in some time. But I was sitting and chatting with her one day, and she told me that one of her granddaughters from like the other side of the family, one of her grandson's partners from the other side of the family was telling her that she was Wiccan and that they worship the devil. And I was like,
That's not Wiccan.
That's bullshit. No Wiccan would ever say something so stupid.
I'm like, and that's what I told her. I said, that sounds made up. And my lovely, gentle, evangelical Christian stepmother said, yeah, she said, I had the feeling she was just trying to just trying to shock me or something. So
yeah, no Wiccan would say that.
Not seriously, but a Satanist might troll a Christian by saying that. I maintain
that's probably true.
Right? I maintain it's a troll on that level. So it's
yeah. All right, so we are doing 2 Samuel 15, and who is reading today?
I volunteer Kip
for his grand return.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. 2 Samuel 15.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Read until 18.
Okay.
Do you mean until 18 or through 18?
Through 18.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. Oh, that, yeah. All right. I will be reading from the 1985 Jewish Publication Society translation. Sometime afterward, Absalom provided himself with a chariot, horses, and 50 outrunners. Absalom used to rise early and stand by the road to the city gates. And whenever a man had a case that was to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" And he answered, "Your servant is from such and such a tribe in Israel." Absalom would say to him, "It is clear that your claim is right and just. Doesn't matter what it is. But there is no one assigned to you by the king to hear it." And Absalom went on, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, and everyone with a legal dispute came before me, I would see that he got his rights. And if a man approached to bow to him, that is, to Absalom, he would extend his hand and take hold of him and kiss him." Absalom did this to every Israelite who came to the king for judgment. Thus, Absalom won away the hearts of the men of Israel. It's all those kisses. After a period of 40 years had gone by, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow that I made to Yahweh. For your servant made a vow when I lived in Gesher of Aram. If Yahweh ever brings me back to Jerusalem, I will worship Yahweh." The king said to him, "Go in peace." And so he set out for Hebron. But Absalom sent agents to all the tribes of Israel to say, "When you hear the blast of the horn, announce that Absalom has become king in Hebron." 200 men of Jerusalem accompanied Absalom. They were invited and went in good faith, suspecting nothing. Absalom also sent to get Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his town Gilo, when the sacrifices were to be offered. The conspiracy gained strength, and the people supported Absalom in increasing numbers. Someone came and told David, "The loyalty of the men of Israel has veered toward Absalom." Whereupon David said to all the courtiers who were with him in Jerusalem, "Let us flee at once, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must get away quickly, or he will soon overtake us and bring down disaster upon us and put the city to the sword." The king's courtiers said to the king, "Whatever our lord the king decides, your servants are ready." So the king left, followed by his entire household, except for 10 concubines, whom the king left to mind the palace. The king left, followed by all the people, and they stopped at the last house. All his followers marched past him, including the Kerethites and the Pelethites and all the Gittites. 600 men who had accompanied him from Gath also marched by the king.
So, to me at least, there are a few things that stand out. So, firstly, just in verse 1 about the chariots and horses, right? So to me, that kind of shows how he's supposed to be the bad guy in the story. So we have talked about this before about chariots and Israel's relationship to chariots. So generally speaking, they would have been, or at least in the the text as we have it, they're very much against chariotry because I mean I have a video on this. It's called Heavenly Horsemen. So essentially the idea is like you shouldn't get chariots, you shouldn't worry about these things because at least being part of your army, because God has his own chariot forces. There is a vision, I think it's in First Kings, maybe Second Kings. Where's the Elijah cycle? Is that First Kings?
It's First Kings.
Yeah.
It's
So,
First and Second Kings.
Oh,
Yeah.
right, because yeah. So there's a vision where he I think it's one of them, Elijah or Elisha. They look they kind of point like right outside this window, and this I think the servant of one of them sees this a whole bunch of chariots in the sky, a whole bunch of horsemen in the sky, and
Yeah, that's Elisha in Second Kings.
Okay, thank you. So
I don't remember where though.
the like there's a reason there are so many provisions against like there's the whole iron chariot thing, right? There is the provisions against getting chariots from Egypt especially. So I think that uh just saying that he had all these chariots is already kind of putting Absalom in this other camp. Uh and it is also interesting that he's running this is a classic campaign trail stuff, right? Like in a political campaign, like he's you have your politicians out there kissing babies and all that stuff. He's doing the same kind of shtick.
He's
He's
just
just
not the babies. He's just kissing all the men.
yeah. But he's being very being a career politician here.
But he's
And
telling the men that they're hard done by, and they're right. And they're right. And he would do what they wanted, if only.
yeah, and it's interesting that he also uses the language of if only I were a judge in the land. So instead of like trying to become
If only it would that
king.
I were king.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
harkens to an older power structure and seems a slightly more humble than stick a crown on my head. But he
Well,
also goes to Hebron, which was where Saul ruled from, and the first capital.
No, no,
Doesn't he?
actually, that's where David's first capital was. Saul ruled in Gibeah. Was it Gibeah?
Okay,
Yeah, I think it was in Gibeah.
I was
So
okay.
yeah,
'Cause the attack,
David's first kingdom was in Hebron. And yes,
right.
but you're absolutely right. That's why Absalom goes there. And I think you're right too in his identifying himself as a judge in the land. He is appealing to this. It's kind of like it's a folksy ancient ideal among the
Mm,
people, right? That we were once this independent group of tribes who just did whatever we wanted, and we were we just rallied together when needed. We didn't have to exist under this centralized authority. And I think too there's something within the text here, like it sure sounds like people are pretty quick to rally around Absalom, and this says something about how dissatisfied they were with uh kingship under David. I would say I would say something else. In terms of the chariots, I see this as, and I think you're right, Lawrence, that this is like chariots whenever they appear in a Hebrew Bible are bad. But this is also one of the reasons for this is because within the ancient Near East, these were entrappings of kingship. This is part of what establishes both your right to rule and your ability to do so. So I see what's if this is a play by Absalom, this is what he's doing. He's assuming the entrapments of kingship, and then he starts acting like a king, standing in the gate and going, "Oh, I'm here to hear your case. The king is too busy, but I'll do it."
I think it's also significant that for like this entire narrative, right? We are talking about the rise of David, like overall, right? So the not just this chapter, but like the whole thing. So I could totally see this as being a like this later version of a story where you want to demonize Absalom, but also you want to prop up your own kingship. So I think that like might be why like he's going back to say like if only I were judge, trying to kind of say, well, like if only we didn't have a kingship anymore, right? If only we had returned back to the days of the judges. So I could totally see this as being as part of that tradition,
I think it's.
or at least
I mean,
demonizing that part of the
I
tradition.
was just going to say, I think he definitely got better justice for Tamar than his dad did. So I'm willing to hear him out.
Yeah, he's not really doing much. That's actually like he's not really doing anything wrong, right? There was like that one thing that was kind of weird beforehand, right? In the last chapter, but like now he's just running a political campaign. This is an election, and David's got to get his shit together. But no,
He
instead
defended his
is
sister's
now
honor, and now he's trying to help people.
yeah,
I like him.
yeah, but it looks like now David is trying to let me just check the text here. Go after his political opponent. Interesting play.
Although David is running like a little biatch.
Yeah.
Have you guys talked at all about the potential historicity of
A little bit.
of these stories and this text?
Not about. I
So-
don't think about Absalom specifically, but like when it comes to David, yeah.
There's one bit that I find a bit interesting, and that's in verse 18 when everyone's fleeing, and except 10 concubines that were left to mind the palace. Sort of like put a pin on that because we're going to get back to this later. I find that a bit
Yeah, that's
interesting.
true.
Oh, sorry.
No, I guess before you
up.
start, Tomer, I was going to say, I mean, we have there's no evidence for the United Kingdom, for a kingdom of Israel that was ruled from Jerusalem. There's evidence that there was a house of David, which probably suggests that there was actually a David. And I tend to think, like, when I read something like the succession narrative, I tend to think that this probably does reflect, because it's not it's a clumsy story. And when I talk about the succession narrative, just so everyone's aware, that's basically the block of text from 2 Kings chapter 11, which begins with the story of David and Bathsheba, and then it runs all the way through to the conclusion of Solomon's succession in 2 Kings chapter 2. So in that block, you've got David and Bathsheba, then you've got Amnon and Tamar.
Do you mean from 2 Samuel chapter 11?
Yes, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
2 Samuel chapter
Yeah.
11 to 1 Kings chapter 2.
There's
Sorry.
there's some repeat stuff in the histories here, and the stuff about Hebron. In this version, they have Joab attacking Saul's son for the succession argument in Hebron, but in a later retelling, we'll go into how David ruled at Hebron and then took over Jerusalem. So yeah, there's a lot of stories. I don't know. I mean, nothing about this narrative paints David as a good guy.
No. And it's like I said, it's cobbled together, I think, a little bit awkwardly. And it reflects some pieces which to us look really strange and also terrible, but were, indicative of the ways in which succession occurred in the ancient Near East. Like excuse me, Amnon was the son of the first wife of Saul, whom David stole, right, as part of his own attempt to usurp Saul. This is what you do.
The new king takes the wives of the old king. Yeah.
Yes. And his firstborn son was her son, and Amnon immediately, is a threat to David's legitimacy because he's also the grandson of Saul. So some guy, Joel Baden has suggested that that David was actually in on the murder of Amnon that you guys read about in the last chapter by Absalom for this reason. And Amnon's rape of Tamar in the preceding chapter is probably a kind of convoluted bid to further establish his own rights to succession by, impregnating a daughter of the king, but he's unsuccessful. So there's these interesting little bits kind of within the text which make me think that there's something behind it. What I think is behind it is a deep dissatisfaction with David as the king in Jerusalem. Probably lots of resistance to it. Probably lots of court politics, violence, and household intrigue. And then this is all sort of varnished, whitewashed, and retold in an effort to rehabilitate David's reputation as best they can, and also in the form of denigrating the northern kingdom. Because remember, there was never a united kingdom, but in writing this part of the story, this takes place in other parts of the Deuteronomistic history as well. The southern writer, the writer from Jerusalem, is also polemicizing against the northern kingdom, now probably now gone northern kingdom, and basically and that's kind of what you see in a lot of these sorts of texts.
If there was
Saul
never a
is
united kingdom, where does Isaac live?
That's good.
Sorry.
In the center of the hollow earth, Aaron. God.
Okay, so true story. I get a call from my bank while I'm in Edinburgh, Scotland, and they're telling me that they're blocking my transactions. Why? I told you that I would be in Scotland, and they said, well, our records show that you're in some place called the United Kingdom. Is that even real? Yeah, it's one part of Disneyland.
I can't with your country anymore. I can't. Why? How is someone that stupid allowed to work at a bank?
We got some comments to catch up on. Jesus Tales says, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. There are many parallels here and in Mark and Zechariah 9:4 or 9:14.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Then Jesus Tales adds, am I reading that right? David forgives trespassers of Jordan. David was mocked as he fled by Shimei. The Mount of Olives is only mentioned here in Zechariah and the Gospels.
I'll just say that I think the parallels are there. I think a lot of them are really, really strained.
Then Matt White says, panel, is anyone reading from the Trump Bible as superintendent instructions?
First of all, I got a lot of problems with the Trump Bible. First of all, it's the King James. That's one of the biggest issues. Secondly, I think in the Oklahoma laws now, it's like any Bible that you use needs to also have like the Constitution and like the Declaration of Independence or like whatever. It needs to have like those American political documents. And the thing is, the only one that's published that way is the Bible you have to use needs to have those things. The only one that is published that way is the Trump Bible, which means that it's literally a fucking scam that now they need to
Give Trump more taxpayer
the only
money.
Bible that can be used by state law is the Trump Bible in those schools.
And then for whatever reason, the Bible doesn't need to contain the Constitution and all that, although it would be nice for kids to see the First Amendment and realize,
I think
hey,
they're hoping to get rid of that before the kids see it.
yeah, well, the problem is in the Trump Bible, where they have the Constitution, they're missing amendments 11 through 27.
That's the one that includes the right of women to vote, right?
Why is the Constitution in Trump Bible?
Okay, because
they're integrating, because they're
America!
violating the First Amendment.
Yeah. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, so Trump published these Bibles, but it was all with the plan to have it be the only Bible that could be used in Oklahoma schools when they said that now the Bible
Holy
needs
cow.
to be taught in Oklahoma schools. So I'm pretty sure it's Oklahoma, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
Teach the
yeah,
fucking
it's
Bible
literally
to
just
those
another
kids.
fucking grift for him to make some money.
Which
Yeah,
is why
and
I'm-
don't anyone dare get one of those Bibles by paying for it, because that sucker does not need any more money.
Yeah. And then Jesus Tales says, Kip Davis, the House of Absalom comes up in the DSS. What do you make of that?
Interesting. So Absalom is actually mentioned twice in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'll just this is easy. I can pull this up here and read this to you. The first place is in Pesher Habakkuk, which is like a running commentary on the first few chapters of the book of Habakkuk. And the writers are taking this prophecy and then applying it to their own current situation. So they're treating it as coded language through which, and then they've got a cipher through which they basically understand how all these things are actually referring to the present. So the mention of the House of Absalom is in column 5, and I'll just read the whole thing to you. So it starts by citing Habakkuk 1:13. How can you look on silently, you traitors, when the wicked destroys one more righteous than he? Here's their interpretation of that. They say this refers to the house of Absalom and the members of their party who kept quiet when the teacher of righteousness was rebuked, and they did not help him against the man of the lie who had rejected the law in the presence of their entire company. So basically what they're doing is they're using this this epithet, House of Absalom, as a designation for what looks to be like a group of people, probably a group of priests within the temple, who would not side with them in their dispute with the man of the lie. In this text is probably the Jerusalem high priest. There was a dispute and a schism that happened in the Jerusalem priesthood sometime in the 2nd century, out of which the Dead Sea Scrolls community was established. So in that text, it's just used as, one of the ciphers. And I think the reason why it's used is because of how Absalom is depicted in this story. He's just one of the great traitors in the Bible. It would be not dissimilar from, someone labeling their an American labeling their political opponent as, the House of Benedict. Is it Benedict Arnold, guy who betrayed the
Benedict Arnold.
yeah. So it wouldn't be all that dissimilar from that. I don't think there's much more to read into that. And then the tomb of Absalom is mentioned in the Copper Scroll, which is a listing of buried temple treasures. And the tomb of Absalom is, and I don't know that much about it, but it's a monument that was built. I at some point in the Hellenistic period, either the 3rd or 2nd century BCE. So they just,
I was
Yeah, it's most likely not its own. It's like its own burial place, but actually like a monument to the burial place next to it. So people just call it the Tomb of Absalom, but it's definitely not.
Any idea why they call it the Tomb of Absalom? I have no idea.
I mean,
Good
I
question.
can't speak about it specifically, but I know that a lot of ancient Greek cult sites, for example, like they weren't the tombs of like their ancient heroes, but they were in texts referred to as the tombs of their ancient heroes. So I know it was at least a common thing for them. So yeah, I don't know, but it's just like a trend. It's just something that they like to do, I guess. They just like to set up a monument and call it a tomb.
It's possible that if the name Tomb of Absalom is mentioned in the DSS, it might not be referring to the same monument that like later people started calling the Tomb of Absalom.
Yeah, that's possible, I suppose.
Yeah,
You
so
could
it
have
could be hundreds of years later people started
a
calling
monument
it
to a dead hero and call it something like the tomb of, but I was just thinking when you said that there was this potential conspiracy theory about David really having been behind the death of Amnon and, bringing forward. Absalom seems to be playing the role of Lucifer, the left hand of the power, doing the dirty work and taking all the blame and then being like, hey, this is a raw deal. And
Do you mean
now,
Satan?
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I meant like classic
Right.
Christian
Sorry.
fanfic version, not the original actual
Yeah,
meaning. But yeah, the role of the devil, of the, doing the hard dirty work, taking the blame, and then being like, fuck this, what the hell is wrong with you? And then,
Got a comment from Jesus Tales. It says, Kip Davis, the house of Absalom is mentioned in the Pasher of Habakkuk. Was
Yeah.
this storyline on the minds of the writers of that era?
Yeah,
Yes.
address that one. Yeah. Also, before we move on, I know that Kip, you and we talked about this before, but you mentioned how like we know that there wasn't a United Monarchy under David. Now one of it's actually cool, like the reasons that we know that, and I know that Kip already knows this. In fact, I know that most of the panel already knows this, probably all of them. So the thing is, like, building campaigns in the north were going on like before the Assyrian invasion, but then after the Assyrian invasion, when everyone moved to the south, to Judah, that's when building campaigns start there. So there wasn't a United Monarchy. We can tell that by the building campaigns, by when they were actually actively building things. And I think Francesca Stavrakopoulos talks about it in her book on Manasseh.
Yeah, it's a very good book. Yeah. And maybe another way to put it is that I guess there was a United Monarchy, but it only happened after the Assyrians completely obliterated the Northern Kingdom and everybody from the north moved south. But nobody ever called that
I think the question is
Kingdom
like,
of Israel.
That let's say there probably wasn't a kingdom of David that was on the entire land, but how come is it true that the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom both claimed descent from David?
Eventually.
No.
Maybe not descent, but
I think
like eventually that they like later on, way later on, they claimed that at least like David ruled both lands, and that was kind of just to it was political propaganda to be like, well, look, we should all live very nicely because this guy David was.
So it's like a southern. So it would have been a southern Judahite kind of.
So it's kind of like and to give people a sense of what this looks like, the Northern Kingdom was established probably by Omri, who we do read about in the Bible, who was the father of Ahab, who we read a lot about in the Bible. And it was one of the, along with Aram, it was one of the two major powers in the region during the entire, like the whole time up until the Assyrians came in and destroyed Samaria in 722 BCE. Up to that point, the kingdom of Judah, or more properly, the kingdom in Jerusalem, that was the house of David, was not much more than, you know, a military fort with a temple on the Acropolis, and probably did not did not extend its power very far. So what you tend to read about in the Deuteronomistic history is this massive elaboration and exaggeration of the southern kingdom, and constant attempts to undermine and denigrate the house of Omri, the kingdom in Samaria. And you know, one of the ways that the writer is propping up their own legitimacy is through making this kind of universal claim of David over everyone, when that is nothing close to reality.
It's interesting how the character of David has been at various times, for various reasons, someone that the writers of portions of the Bible and the editors and compilers at various times for various reasons have really idolized. And you know, you've got when the temple cult of Yahweh put Josiah on the throne as a kid and really played up the whole, you know, oh, God promised the land to David forever as a reason to, you know, put a 12-year-old on the throne. And then you've got this retcon where you have Judah flooded with refugees from Israel of the, hey, we were all one country once, but we were still better than you. So it's like, you know, the back and forth between the cooperate, but you're still second class, but close. But, you know, you get this tension. You can hear it in the text when you look at the different areas and times it was written. It's, David is, he reminded of like a petty tent warlord who calls himself an emperor. It's very much that vibe. And then, of course, any hero stories of any, because I've no doubt there were, you know, heroes and men of battle and war who had done great things, made clever ploys, done great feats of strength or whatever. You know, and then a lot of these get attached either to David or to his associates. And you kind of, it builds into this hugely mythological thing where, you know, it's kind of like Jesus at this point, like, maybe there was a dude at the root of this. Maybe there were 2 or 3, but we have no fucking clue at this point.
Okay, I think I should start on the commentary. So I'll start on verse
I'm
1.
gonna leave.
Please add Rashi's commentary on verse 2.
What is it?
Or maybe it's verse 1 actually, like the runners.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. It is verse 1. So, on verse 1, 50 men to run ahead of him. In addition to Rashi, based on Talmud Sanhedrin 21b, wrote that all of these men had their spleen removed and their soles of their feet hollowed in order to enhance their speed. Yeah, spleen.
Spleen or thigh?
It's spleen.
What?
Yeah, it's troll.
I think it. I mean, my English translation has thigh.
Troll is in Hebrew is spleen.
Well, I mean, I
that's
don't
more
understand how
Hebrew.
removing the spleen increases your speed, but removing your thigh, I think, would impede that quite a bit.
Well, here's the thing. If you weigh less, if you get your spleen removed, you can move faster.
But is this one of those
I think
cases
the
where they're
idea-
using thigh not as thigh, but as a
That's dick?
euphemism?
You get your dick
I
removed.
don't
That's
know,
what you're asking?
because
Yeah.
I know the translation I see has got it thigh, and I thought the idea was like, to people who don't understand how muscles work, maybe they thought the thigh was just getting in the way, and you know.
Well, your
I mean,
balls
it also
might
says
get
they
in the
remove
way.
their
Way of
heels.
running. Now,
Sorry.
What verse is this?
I can see
Yeah, that's
removing, somebody's junk to get in the way of running. That actually makes sense, depending on what kind of underwear they had back then.
Probably not much.
None.
Yeah.
It also says they removed their heels so that when they run, they wouldn't get thorns and pain in their feet.
Because you can't run with sandals, I guess.
Yeah.
So let's in order to make them faster, let's fuck up their feet and give them abdominal surgery.
Yep.
Because
Or
that
it
makes guys run faster.
Oh God. What was the spleen associated with though? Because people, there's different metaphorical associations of organs with different attributes and
the only
things.
thing I
Maybe
ever
it's
heard the
something like
spleen
that.
associated with was flatulence, and I would have thought that a little bit of that would assist in providing thrust.
Rashi in his commentary on the Talmud says that the spleen makes the person heavier.
My joke answer was correct. Okay.
Wow. Sounds
Yeah.
like someone passed kidney stones and really misunderstood the situation.
Okay, I'll continue.
They were like, these guys they're packing too much to be good runners. Like, whatever.
Okay, I'll continue on the comment. Bar-Efrat wrote that Absalom is behaving in a condescending manner, with Anderson noting that this may have been a case of, quote, ostentatious display, according to Conroy, or a tendency to megalomania, according to Fockelman, end quote. He notes, however, that this display could also provide a potential military nucleus, since 50 was a standard military unit, according to Exodus 18:21 and Deuteronomy 1:15. Tsumura cites an Aramaic inscription of the 8th century BCE, in which Panamua, a military supporter of King Tiglath-Pileser III, was running at the wheel of his lord's chariot. On verse 4, judge in the land. McCarter notes Eerdmans' opinion that by using the term shofet, Absalom is trying to, quote, associate himself with the best Israelite traditions, end quote. He writes, however, that this interpretation is incompatible with the royal connotations of owning a chariot and runners, 1 Samuel 8:1. Instead, Absalom is appealing to the equally venerable tradition of the king as judge, a role which David has not played. Tsumura notes C.H. Gordon's comparison between the author's treatment of Absalom's rebellion and between the rebellion of the crown prince Yassib in the Ugaritic Keret epic. He notes that Yassib, like Absalom, claimed to be motivated by a lack of justice. On verse 7, 4 years. Hebrew Bible reads 40 years. Although this reading is reflected in the Septuagint, Targum, and KJV, this time period sounds impossible. Most traditional commentators, based on Talmud Nasir 5a and Seder Olam Rabbah 14, wrote that this refers either to 40 years since the establishment of King Saul, according to Rashi, Kara, Kimchi, and Ditrani, or King David, according to Gersonides. Tsumura, however, notes that this cannot refer to the 40th year of David's reign, since this is the last year, according to 5.4. The Lusanic Recension, Peshitta, Vulgate, and Josephus in Antiquity 7.196 read 4 years. This reading is accepted by most modern commentators, with McCarter writing that this specifies the time that has passed since the reconciliation of David and Absalom. 2 Hebrew manuscripts, Kennicott 70 and 96, read 40 days, a reading which is rejected by Anderson since it would hardly give enough time for planning the rebellion in Israel and Judah.
This 40 years thing is where the literal mind drives me fucking crazy. 40 years is constantly used in the scriptures. It's an absolute trope and a cultural norm to use 40 years as something equivalent to in the fullness of time. Like Moses, every era of his life takes 40 years. You really think that's supposed to be literal? No, it's that this, in this completeness of this era of his life, and then this, and then this, and then this. That's how it's used so frequently. The number 40, 40 years, 40 days, 40 everything. It drives me crazy.
You mean
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
not
40
just a remarkable
days.
coincidence that happens to some people like that?
Yeah, it's almost
Like-
like words can mean things, and there can be cultural norms that we use to reference ideas.
Nope.
I mean, it makes sense to me that if it said 40 days, then it's just like, a period of time, because we've seen before that 40 days is just like, it doesn't necessarily mean an actual period of 40 days. It could just be a long
reminds
period
me
of
of
time. has
another question.
passed.
Why was it, the
Yeah.
40 days and 40 nights? I mean, because nobody really suspects that it might have been 40 days and no nights, or 40 days and 25 nights. I mean, what?
Poetic drama.
Yeah.
Also, don't tell that pastor who just starved himself to death to try and beat Jesus that it wasn't a literal 40 days.
Yeah.
I've heard
okay,
that people actually have done that, like controlled
Yeah.
fasts for 40 days, right?
I mean, the thing is, people could have gone a lot longer, like especially in like Eastern traditions. Like they are
Yeah.
crazy with their asceticism.
God. I'm such a baby. I can barely last a day without food.
Well, maybe you should be busier. You'll last a lot more days without food.
Okay, well, this pastor was an
probably
idiot and not only fasted from food, but water, and thus killed himself. And also, I'm
Oops.
not going 40 days without coffee. I will cut a bitch.
Oh no.
I think what a lot of them don't realize is like for the ascetics in like Eastern traditions, like they like slowly kind of taper off to this stuff. Like they have their body essentially acclimate to like lower and lower I don't know what the word I'm fucking looking for is.
Metabolism.
You need like less and less things. Your body essentially kind of fixes for it, starts feeding off of other reserves, energy reserves, and it's like it's not. They don't just go cold turkey. Although there's a lot of myths about ascetics going cold turkey, they don't. The people who are actually doing it that like we can speak to today. No.
Okay, on that same verse, I will worship the Lord in Hebron. Several commentators take Yahweh in Hebron to be the local manifestation of Yahweh in Hebron, much like Yahweh Teman and Yahweh Samaria. McCarter compares it with Dagon in Ashdod in 1 Samuel 5:5. Anderson, however, writes that this does not mean that the unity of Yahweh was denied, and it may point to different cultic traditions. Tsumura writes that local deities are expressed not by deity name in geographic name, but rather by the construct chain deity name of geographic name. He writes, quote, "The phrase in Hebron modifies the main verbs go and fulfill, not the subordinate made. Hence, fulfill in Hebron my vow. Such an interpretation of the nucleus of a sentence by the insertion of a relative clause is common," end quote.
If this was a previous place of leadership, it's likely that there was a cultic site there, to which there might have been traditions attached that were older than or perceived to be older than some of the religious traditions associated with Jerusalem.
On verse 8, while your servant was living at Geshur in Aram, it is not previously told that Absalom made a vow in Geshur. Bar-Efrat suggested that Absalom was lying, but writes that if he did indeed make a vow, he could have already paid for it, and so it is clear that he uses the vow as an excuse. On verse 12, Absalom was offering sacrifices. Auld comments, David is reported as offering sacrifice only in connection with the ark, 2 Samuel 6, and the future temple site, 2 Samuel 24. Absalom's sacrifices in Hebron may be part of his claimed service, quote-unquote, of Yahweh in verse 8, but they also form part of a pattern established in 1 Samuel of sacrifice in connection with the anointing of a new king. David himself in 1 Samuel 16 and Saul before him in 1 Samuel 9 and 10 were anointed by Samuel on the occasion of a sacrificial festival, although each of them in secret, and sacrifice accompanies the self-proclamation of Absalom, 2 Samuel 15 verses 10 and 12, and later of Adoniah in 1 Kings 1 verses 5, 9, and 10. The many invited guests from Jerusalem are another part of the same pattern. The term is used only in 1 Samuel 9 verses 13 and 22 and 1 Kings 1, 41 and 49, and here. All three celebrations are associated with a king who will not last: Saul, Absalom, and Adoniah. The point is made explicitly here, but seems true of the other accession parties as well, that these invitees are simple extras, quote unquote, unaware of what is going to happen.
Yeah,
Or at
there's,
least
there's
they
like a
claim to
story
be.
about. I think there's
Sorry.
a story that Absalom would got permission to take a certain amount of people with him, and then he used the same document with multiple people in different parts of the city, and ended up with 200.
On that same verse, Achitophel. The exact meaning of his name is unclear. The first element, Achi, means my brother, but Tophel is unknown. BDB Dictionary suggests folly, and thus Achitophel means my brother is folly. If so, this may have been a deliberate distortion of his original name. Perhaps either Achi Baal, my brother is Baal, according to Mazar, Eliphelet, according to Hertzberg, or Achiphelet, according to McCarter. Kimchi, in his commentary on 17.3, suggested that Achitophel was Bathsheba's grandfather, based on the assumption that Eliam, father of Bathsheba, is identical to Eliam, son of Achitophel, 23:34. Bar-Efrat, however, notes Segal's rejection of this reading, since Achitophel's age during the rebellion was too high, and since by joining Absalom, he would work against the benefit of his granddaughter and her son Solomon. On verse 16, he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. Commentators note that this prepares for what Absalom is going to do in 16 verses 21 and 22. Bar-Efrat added that this may also indicate David's desire to return to his home. McCarter notes Langlamet's opinion that this phrase is secondary, since he doesn't take 16 verses 21 and 22 to be original to the story of Absalom's rebellion. Anderson writes, quote, if Tsevat is right that, quote, the marriage of a former king's wife bestows legitimacy of an aspirant, end quote, then David would have been very unwise to leave behind any concubine.
Yeah, he seems to be relying on some sort of social taboo of the king's concubines are not untouchable or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's also possible that every woman in the palace who was not married and lived outside was considered
No,
a
we'll
concubine.
stay here. I don't know. I was just thinking. No, I was just thinking. Maybe it was more. No, David, that's fine. We'll stay here. Instead of
I
continue
would
to.
have done
Oh
that.
wow, our first opportunity to get away. Hell yeah. Okay, you go.
Hell yeah.
We'll stay here.
Yeah, considering
Yeah,
how he treated
you're a
women and
terrible
how
human.
Absalom treated women, I would have stayed too.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean,
But-
I see what you're saying, Lilith. Like a lot of harems would have, the maids themselves would have been.
They would have been
picked
considered
from,
property of the
from
king,
rich
and
families,
thus
and
they weren't
Yeah.
allowed to, be with anyone else.
if the king liked them, then they might get promoted to a proper concubine or whatever. But yeah.
Mhm.
Could it also be just like a rhetorical tool or literary tool to kind of keep you engaged in what's ahead? Is there some sort of form?
Foreshadowing?
Definitely. I mean, there's been foreshadowing of what's going to happen next.
Okay, on 17, with all the people, I just included that the Septuagint has and all his servants, and 2 Hebrew manuscripts, Kennicott 70 and 198, read and all his household, V'kol beito. And on that same verse, the edge of the city, Hebrew Bible reads Beit HaMilchak, literally the house of the distance. Traditional commentators take it to be the farthest place in Jerusalem, based on Targum, which reads at a distant place. According to Numbers Rabbah 3:2, David was ousted. On verse 18, Septuagint reads, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say the farthest house in Jerusalem wasn't very far. It's probably 50 yards, 80 yards from the palace. So Jerusalem was tiny in the in like the 10th century.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, not today. On verse 18,
Not today, no.
Not today. Not today. On verse 18, Septuagint reads, "And all his servants were passing close by him, and every Keti and every Pelethi, and they stood by the olive tree in the wilderness. And all the people were passing by near him, and all those about him, and all the prominent men, and all the warriors, 600 men, and they were passing by at his hand, and every Kerethite and every Pelethite, and all the Githites, 600 men, who came on their feet from Geth, going in front of the king." End quote. McCarter takes the Masoretic text reading to be defective, resulting from haplography, and Septuagint, except for recessional pluses, preserves the approximate shape of the primitive text. He writes that the Masoretic text reading was shortened by a haplography involving the repeated sequence al yado v'kol, past him and all. Tsumura, however, argued that the prose text of the Masoretic text is poetic, quote-unquote, and may be the original.
Have you guys have you talked at all about the Kerethites and the Pelethites?
I think
they're
we've talked
mentioned.
about yeah, we talked about them previously. I think the Kerethites are like considered to be the Cretes, and the Pelethites are an unknown. There are some who interpret them to be the Philistines, but it's not clear.
Yeah, not clear.
They seem to be used almost like a metaphor for some sort of like expert unit or something.
Sorry, guys.
That Alexa.
Alexa's having issues.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet. For help, go to the Harlem Prime Alexa app.
Alexa, shut down.
It's the voice of
Alexa, order
Can I do that?
32 cases of beer.
Shut up.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet.
Oh no.
Go to the Harlem Card in Alexa app.
Maybe I just
Do a
need to
manual
unplug her.
shutdown. Yeah, do it.
Yeah. Sorry. Hold on.
Yeah,
Man, I really wish Kip didn't have headphones. We could like order so much shit for him.
In the meantime, Mark Agamotto 1313 Smith, well, there's a name, says $5. Dr. Kip, you are better than me. I can barely go 6 hours without food and only 30 minutes without coffee. And Kip didn't hear a word of that. It was addressed to him.
Just
was that the coffee and food?
Yeah.
Comment. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was going to say, before being so rudely interrupted by my artificial intelligence, I am somewhat sympathetic to this idea that the Pelethites or is it the Perethites?
Kerethites.
I think that these are Cretans and Philistines, and here too their mention is made of the Gittites that David brought with him from Gath, the Philistine city, and like reading through the entire story of David, and this is kind of interesting. There's a lot of discussion about, whether or not he was just a Philistine who came in and usurped Saul and established his own kingdom in Jerusalem.
That would explain why there's so much retcon about him killing Philistines, but then he also went and lived with them and came from there. But, that's an interesting idea. I wish we had Aaron's time machine.
Yes. This is
I
the
think
time for it.
I think we should continue.
Oh, you always think that.
I do.
It's nothing
yeah.
to do with the time, I'm sure.
No, not at all. Please.
You and
continue.
your cursed efficiency. Okay. Who continue
Yeah,
reading?
Kip, you want to finish the chapter?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. Alrighty. Verse 19. And the king said to Ittai the Gittite from Gath, why should you two go with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and you are also an exile from your country. You came only yesterday. Should I make you wander about with us today, when I myself must go wherever I can? Go back and take your kinsmen with you in true faithfulness. Ittai replied to the king, as Yahweh lives and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, there your servant will be, whether for death or for life. And David said to Ittai, then march by. And Ittai the Gittite and all his men and all the children who were with him marched by. The whole countryside wept aloud as the troops marched by. Sure. The king crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the troops crossed the road to the wilderness. Then Zadok appeared with all the Levites carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God, and they set down the Ark of God until all the people had finished marching out of the city. Abiathar also came up, but the king said to Zadok, take the Ark of God back to the city. If I find favor with Yahweh, he will bring me back and let me see it and its abode. And if he should say, I do not want you, I am ready. Let him do with me as he pleases. And the king said to the priest Zadok, do you understand? You return to the safety of the city with your two sons, your own son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. Look, I shall linger in the steppes of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. Zadok and Abiathar brought the Ark of God back to Jerusalem and stayed there. David, meanwhile, went up the slope of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and he walked barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and wept as they went by. David was told that Ahithophel was among the conspirators with Absalom, and he prayed, please, Yahweh, frustrate Ahithophel's counsel, because he was like the best counselor, Ahithophel.
Yeah, Ahithophel
When
was
David
like Confucius say, wise.
Yes, he was. When David reached the top, where people would prostrate themselves to God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him. With his robe torn and with earth on his head, David said to him, if you march on with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you go back to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant formerly, and now I will be yours. Then you can nullify Ahithophel's counsel for me. You will have the priests Zadok and Abiathar there, and you can report everything that you hear in the king's palace to the priests Zadok and Abiathar. Also, their two sons are there with them, Zadok's son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. And through them you can report to me everything you hear. And so Hushai, the friend of David, reached the city as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. Dun, dun, dun. It's a little bit melodramatic, isn't it?
Planting spies? Very
The
clever.
Bible doesn't usually have spies. This is too
Excuse me, Mr.
crazy.
Stabbed in the gut and my sword vanished into his belly fat.
He's not just a spy. He's like an undercover agent.
He's a double agent.
He's a double agent.
Yeah.
Double agent.
Double agent. This is admittedly when the Bible gets a bit more interesting. I still think most of the good guys are assholes, but double agents and secret alliances and running and hiding. Like it's a good story. It's got good vibes. You're like, at least it's interesting. Still think you're fucking nuts, but it's interesting.
There's quite a lot of, if this was a movie, the bit of them walking away from the city and talking to this person, talking to that person, it's a bit too much exposition, I think.
Tell me about it, right?
And this person's name is this, and this person's name is that. Like,
But
Okay.
there's a very clear literary thing going on here, necessary literary exchange. You have the establishment that the intellects and the priests are all really on David's side, even if they went back. They only went back because he told them to. There's also the exchange like, no, why must you go with me? Go back. No, surely, as the Lord lives, I will follow you. Blah 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 blah. You notice David didn't send that guy back. That's very like appropriate language and manners of the time. We forget sometimes that many things which are said habitually were never meant to be literal. We all understand that in our own culture. Other cultures are the same way. There was a time, I believe, when in Chinese culture, if they said, I'll get this back to you in 3 days, they meant, no, I'm never doing that. But it was not polite to say, sod off, I'm not doing that. You would say in 3 days, and then the person understood.
Hey, have you guys ever talked about the fact that David's got 2 high priests?
Ooh,
I definitely
Yeah,
talked about.
it seems to be maybe a transition or something over here,
I
right?
know I definitely talked about Zadok and
Yeah.
how that would later cause some issues. So Zadok.
So I think so. This is David's got 2 priests, Zadok and Abiathar. Abiathar is part of this. He comes out of the shrine at Shiloh. That was where Saul massacred all the priests. Right. That's
he
where.
was the only
that's where-
survivor of Eli's family,
No,
wasn't he?
nope.
That particular family that was the high priest at that time.
Yeah.
So he was part of that high priestly family. And then Zadok just kind of appears right after David invades and occupies the city of Jerusalem. So I wrote a paper about this in grad school, and I read an article about some of these texts, which was really interesting in terms of presenting this situation as part of the accommodations that David would necessarily have had to make if this was a true thing, if he actually came in from outside of Jerusalem, conquered and occupied the city and set up his capital, then he would need to make accommodations to the people who were still there, right? And the suggestion is that this is what one of these accommodations were. The reason for this is because Sadok, the name Sadok, is one of these names that seems to be traditionally associated with the ancient city of Jerusalem. You'll remember that the king of Salem, his name was Melchizedek. The king of Jerusalem in the conquest narratives is it Abis Zadok? I don't remember, but it seems to be kind of like a traditional name. And I think I like this idea, but it's because I like a lot of fanciful ideas. But I like this idea that David had to have these 2 high priests in the city of Jerusalem as part of this political accommodation. The shrine at Shiloh is important. The priesthood at Shiloh is important. I've got this group that's already there, at the sacred site in Jerusalem, that I need to maintain this in order to keep everybody happy. We have to have everybody working together here in the city of Jerusalem. And then, of course, what happens in the aftermath of this, as we'll eventually get to, in Adonijah's coup attempt at the end, at the beginning of First Kings, Abiathar sides with Adonijah as the new king, and Zadok remains with Solomon as the new king. And as punishment for Abiathar, his family is basically exiled to this place called Anatoth. and Anatoth remains unmentioned throughout the rest of the Bible until you get to Jeremiah chapter 1, which is where Jeremiah came from. He was a descendant of this priestly group living out in Anatoth, who traced their ancestry back to the Shiloh Shrine, and the traditional association among biblical scholars of the Shiloh Shrine, the Shiloh priesthood, the family of Eli, and then the writers and the readers of the book of Deuteronomy tends to identify this group as the Levites. So there's like priestly competition going on throughout the history of ancient Israel, and I think this comes out in the text like this.
I don't know if this is going to come up in Tomer's commentary, but I know that the narrative I was raised with was very much that the prophecy against Eli, who raised Samuel because of his son's misbehavior and all of that, is why this particular family of priests was ultimately disposed of. And of course Saul, because Saul is bad and bad Saul. But then it's like, this evil man did this evil thing, but it was really to fulfill this prophecy for God. So see, he's in control anyway, even though he's a dick. But then, of course, all of this gets very retconny vibes, very making excuses after the fact for why, of course, everything we did is completely right. And of course, these new priests are. I was trying to remember, because unless it was one of the few days I missed, I don't think Samuel covers when David is supposed to have actually taken Jerusalem, captured Jerusalem in that.
It's short. It's just a little. It's like a paragraph, and I think it's
in
2
there?
Samuel chapter 5.
I must have been that one time I was ill. But yeah. Okay, then. Sorry I missed that, but I was thinking maybe it was in another part of the thing. But yeah, it's an interesting little story there. But I don't know. Anyway, the point is, all of this very much has the feel of lots of slightly shady or very shady and stabby things were done in power struggles, and after the fact, we all have very good reasons why we were honor bound to do the shady things, and look at that.
We got a comment from Robert Muldoon JP, who offers $5 and says, Aaron, who is the bigger fraud, Jim Baker or Bob Tilton? That's a tough call, but I'm going to give it to Jim Baker because he was at it a decade before Bobby Tilton. And he's still at it. And Tilton is at it still. He's still a complete fraud, but he's kind of hidden out. He's not as prominent as he once was. All right. And then Mark Agamotto 1313 Smith says, Tomer keeps things going. Otherwise, you lot would go off on tangents for days. I totally support Tomer.
Thank you.
Somebody has to.
And then Jesus Tales says, is this procession similar to the crossing of the Jordan by Joshua in Josh 3? Notice it will be a big deal at the Jordan as David returns later. There's even 2 spies.
Yeah, there's a definite literary reference there, absolutely, where they're trying to mirror it and give that whole, these are the ordained people, even if they're temporarily going into exile because they fucked something up.
And then Kent McLeod says, Lawrence, I remember you were writing another book. How's it coming along, and when would it be available?
I have not written in that thing in a while because stress. Just been worried about a lot of different things. Been keeping busy. Hopefully I can get back to it soon, though.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too. Anyway.
Yeah, okay. I'll start on verse 19. Ittai the Gittite. McCarter and Tsumura compare Ittai's name to the Hittite Atta and Hurrian Attai, both meaning father, an onomastic element common at Ugarit. Tsumura notes that Garsiel hears the echo, quote-unquote, of Ittai the Gittite's name in the fourfold repetition of the pronouns you, Atta, and with us, Itanu. Thus, if the original form is Attai, this wordplay is more effective. Garsiel writes that the narrator seems to emphasize, quote, the common fate of Ittai, David, and his loyal followers, end quote. On verse 23, and all the people moved on toward the wilderness. In Hebrew, al pnei derech et hamidbar, literally, upon the way of the wilderness. The objection marker, et, seems unnecessary. Vulgate and Kimchi read, the way to the wilderness. Titrani takes the wilderness to be Jether. The Lucianic recension reads, the olive way in the wilderness, reading derech hazait asher b'midbar. This reading is accepted by McCarter and Anderson, the former writing that et is a corrupt vestige of hazait, and that the olive way, quote, was a no, it wasn't a quotation. The olive way was a road leading up to the slope of the olives in verse 30 and over the crest of at Tu Bachurim in 16:5.
Oh, is this where Christians are extrapolating the Mount of Olives? I am so shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense to be the Mount of Olives. I think the it's like it's in the direction of Jerusalem to the Jordan, and it also mentions something about like bowing down, and there's like a traditional commentary that says that, you know, when people would come up to the city through that direction, from the top of the Mount of Olives, you could see the temple or the tabernacle or whatever. So you would, at that point, you'd stop and pray towards the city or whatever.
Yeah, the rising the crest of the hill and seeing the marble reflected in the sun, and oh, praise be, you know, yeah, it's kind of was a trope.
Which might have been might have been a thing that people did, you know.
It might have been, and once they built something,
but it's interesting that they.
Yeah, once they built a proper temple.
Yeah,
I'm
sure
Herod's temple.
I was thinking that whole bit about David going up the mount in agony and the weeping and all that kind of reminds me of like modern day Catholic processions where they go up a mountain on their knees, you know, seeking favor from God.
Oh,
that kind of thing.
You know,
they go up the mountain on their knees.
On their knees, many of them.
Jeez, like I would hate. Oh God, I
as a child.
I could see that if it was steep enough.
I would need knee pads. Are they allowed to wear knee pads?
No, the point is the fetishization of pain. A lot of Catholicism is people
This is why I'm not
who are trying to sanctify their masochism or sadism or sadomasochism under the guise of the holy, instead of just getting a leather daddy and keeping it behind closed doors and not involving the rest of us. They're also exhibitionists.
I got a comment from Ronaldo Martinez, offers $1.99 and says, what is your opinion on Sandy Patty? Well, I don't have an opinion. I had to Google her.
Oh my God.
See, the things I had to Google her too. At first I thought that was...
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
She was on the approved list of musicians that I was allowed to listen to when I was a teenager.
Was this before or after the divorce?
No, this is.
I don't know. This was how. I don't know. I'm pretty old.
She got divorced for infidelity, and it
long before the divorce.
Yeah, according to the article, it stalled her career in the 1990s.
Did she? Was that okay? Yeah. This is this is what may hurt you the most about my upbringing, because while I love my parents, they were Jesus freaks and got into a lot of the evangelical stuff when they were young, and I was their oldest child, so I got the worst of it, which means when I was a child, I didn't get to listen to any of the music of the 80s. I was only allowed to listen to Sandy Patty and Amy Grant. I didn't even get to listen to Stephen Curtis Chapman, okay? which you or Michael W. Smith, which you would think wasn't even, and it isn't. But oh my God, I cannot express to you how much trauma just the idea of Sandy Patty brings up to me. I missed the 80s, Aaron, the entire 80s musically, all of and half the 90s. Then I was allowed to listen to DC Talk, but even that was a battle. Oh my God.
You have my sincere sympathies.
Thank you.
I at least was allowed to listen to the Resurrection Band and Striper.
Striper. Of
The
course.
only thing I have to even compare with this is that I when I was a kid, they used to send me to go stay with my grandparents for the summer when I was a little kid, and they always watched Lawrence Welk.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's like the Gaithers level. Oh,
I was raised Catholic, so I could listen to whatever I wanted to.
So
Trevor and Wright.
I have to confess, I still indulge in some old 80s and 90s Christian heavy metal.
Wow. Well, yeah, I didn't do the Christian heavy metal, but after coming away from the upbringing with Lawrence Welk and all that shit, and everybody else in my family, like for whatever reason, the Rat Pack guy, yeah,
Sinatra.
yeah, exactly, Sinatra. I couldn't think of his name. I just couldn't stand music like that. When I discovered Ozzy, it was such a relief. Now I'm in heaven. Okay.
Jesus Tales, stop it. Stop it right now. He's quoting snippets of Sandy Patty songs that I remember having.
Trevor and Wright says, why is the wilderness such a crucial place for the Israelites to dwell and practice their traditions, including the Mountain of Olives? What role did that play in connection to the temple?
Always with the loaded
Well, the Mountain of Olives
questions.
is would have been right outside the city.
Yeah,
It's not
that's
exactly the
just right
wilderness.
across the valley there.
Yeah.
And then Satan 616 says, I suffered from self-hate and self-punishment due to the glorification of suffering in Christianity. My mental health improved a lot after abandoning these harmful beliefs. I get that.
Yeah.
Solidarity, brother.
Yep.
Okay, on 24, all the Levites who were with him were carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God. Many commentators see the reference to the Levites as a later gloss, which replaced the original reference to Abiathar, for which the reading Abiathar went up, in Hebrew Vayal Evyatar, is a surviving remnant. McCarter writes that the gloss was made by a Deuteronomistic editor, who insisted that the holy object must have had an appropriate retinue of Levites. Tsumura, however, writes that the Levites existed during the pre-exilic days. Nevertheless, Auld takes Levites to be a later addition and writes, quote, the whole passage was probably drafted in response to a question whether the ark was more closely linked to Jerusalem itself or to David, who had brought it there.
Sorry, I concur. I'm sorry. I have to say this, and it's a little bit off topic. Well, maybe not. Anyways, I concur just brought up this point that asking if Striper is banned by the Geneva Convention, and I just have to tell this little. I promise this very very short little anecdote, which I find amusing. Prior to October 7th of last year. I was working with Derek Lambert of Myth Vision and Neil Sandling of The Gnostic Informant to put together a tour of various sites in Israel, and we were working on planning dates for that. And one of the dates that we were looking at was in April. It would have been April of this last year, April 2024, and right around Easter. And I was very amused to see that at the same time we were planning on doing a tour of Israel, Striper was also organizing their own special tour of Israel. But what was really, really funny about theirs, because I pulled up their tour itinerary, they had planned to go visit the city of David on the Sabbath. So I thought that was hilarious, because I'm pretty sure they're closed, aren't they?
Like the archaeological site or
Yeah,
museum sort of thing? Probably. I think everything is closed in Jerusalem on Saturday.
I think so. But leave it to Striper to not think about that. So, anyways,
You have to say, wait till Sunday. Your Lord is still dead.
sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, Tomer.
That's
I know
fine.
you hate me.
No, it's just the mention of October 7th. It's just brought back terrible memories. Sorry.
I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. On verse 27, do you understand? In Hebrew, haro'e ata. The word ro'e can be understood as a verb meaning look, as we see in the Lusanic recension in the singular, Alexandrinus and Vaticanus in plural, and thus, look, you are turning back, according to McCarter. Some read this phrase as a question, meaning, does it seem right to you, according to Kara and Kimchi, or are you not an observant person, according to Anderson? Vogt and Targum read, you are the seer. Van Starda and Solman explains that ro'eh is the technical term for a seer. The reading seer is extended by Tsumura, who reads, are you a seer? Peshitta reads, return, go to the city. On that same verse, you and Abiathar return with your 2 sons. Hebrew Bible reads, 2 of your sons with you. In Hebrew, Shnei benechem itchem, without referring to Abiathar. Moreover, in verse 28, we find the plural from you, me'imachem. In verse 29, we find and Tzadok and Abiathar brought in the singular, in Hebrew, vayashev, the ark of the God back to Jerusalem, and they stayed vayeshvu there. End quote. Rashi, based on Seder Olam Rabbah 14 and Talmud Yoma 63b, explained that Abiathar was removed from the priesthood because he inquired of the Urim and Thummim, but was not answered, and so Sadok replaced him. Bar-Efrat notes that modern commentators see here an attempt by later editors to remove Abiathar from the writing after the priesthood passed from the house of Eli, which Abiathar was a descendant of, to the house of Tzadok. Compare 1 Kings 2, verses 26 and 27. On verse 30, the Mount of Olives, in Hebrew, Ma'aleh HaZehitim, literally the slope of olives. Commentators generally identify it with the Mount of Olives, with McCarter suggesting that this was an older name for the Mount of Olives, in Hebrew, Har HaZeitim, which is not attested before the post-exilic period, Zechariah 14:4. Several Greek manuscripts and Josephus in Antiquities 7202 read the slope of the Mount of Olives.
That makes sense. It's not exactly a mountain, so.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're in the city and this is like a major landmark, the slope of olives makes a lot of sense.
On verse 30, his head was covered. In Hebrew, verosh lo chafui. The verb chafui is generally taken to mean that his head was covered, as we see in early translations, Rashi, Titrani, followed by Bar-Efrat, Tsumura, and Auld, and take it as a sign of mourning, as we see in Isaiah 22, Micah 1:8, and Esther 6:12. McCarter, however, reads, his head was bare, without any given explanation. Likewise, Anderson writes that this custom implied in Ezekiel 24, verses 17 and 23 seems to point to this reading, and that it would make a better sense of the practice of putting dust or ashes on one's head, as we see in 2 Samuel 13:19, Nehemiah 9:1, and Job 2:12.
Yeah, if you think about it, like Orthodox Jews believe that it's a law from Moses to cover the head at all times. And over here it's saying, oh, they're mourners, they're covering their heads. It's kind of implying that they didn't cover their heads normally, or is it trying to say that that they cover their heads with dirt or something like that, which is different? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. On verse 32, Hushai the Archite. The name Hushai is of uncertain origin. McCarter writes that the name, quote, may belong to a common type that indicates ethnic origin, suggesting that the family came from Shua, either the Aramean state called Shuhu, or on the right bank of the middle Euphrates, or the Edomite or Arabian tribe alluded to in Genesis 25:12, end quote. Tsumura notes that the name is also known in the Arad Ostraca in 57:2. According to Joshua 16:2, the Archite clan was part of Benjamin. On verse 34, Septuagint has the following addition, quote, and if you return to the city and will say to Absalom, your brothers have passed through, and your father the king has passed through behind me, and now I am your servant, O king, permit me to live, etc. End quote. Auld writes that this was omitted from the Masoretic text due to the similarity in the Hebrew characters between its initial avru, they have crossed, and avdecha, your servant, at the start of the shared material. Likewise, McCarter amends the text based on the Septuagint reading and takes the Masoretic text reading to be the result of a haplography. Tsumura, however, writes that these restorations are unnecessary, for such words would not have helped Hushai gain Absalom's trust. And finally, verse 37, David's confident. In Hebrew, Re'eh David. The word Re'eh is usually taken to mean friend, as we see in Vulgate, Targum, and Peshitta, followed by Kinchi and Bar-Efrat. Some take Re'eh to be an honorary title, like Devo, who compares it with the Egyptian honorific Rach Nasu, acquaintance of the king. Anderson, however, writes that Ra'ah can also denote a royal official of high standing, since Hushai is listed among Solomon's high officials in 1 Kings 4:5. He adds that the office of the king's friend may have been a foreign origin, and the exact responsibilities of the office are uncertain, though he may have acted as the king's intimate counselor. Tsumura notes that David is called the friend of Hushai in 1617, and so it also expresses a relationship. Now, for some of the ancient Christians, I only have two. So Cyril of Jerusalem, who lived in the 4th century, writes that by choosing to escape Absalom by way of the Mount of Olives, David invokes in his mind the deliverer who would ascend from there into heaven. His deliverance, having sinned and repented, encourages our repentance.
Oh my God.
You see, he was thinking about Jesus the whole time.
Yeah.
You know, we used to say,
Hey,
oh,
Jesus, bro.
Wasn't it Jesus Man?
Oh, no,
No,
Jesus
that's,
Man is
David
the
A.R.
original meme.
Okay.
Jesus Bro is the who's the
That's David A.R. White, who's like I'm pretty sure he's one of the owners of like
he started
Pure
Pureflix so he
or-
wouldn't have to do
yeah.
Cristiano Brothers movies anymore. But he said
Yeah.
Jesus Man. The Jesus Bro was from the it was like a
The
parody of
super-
Christian movies that was put together by the
That's
Nostalgia
it.
Critic.
Yeah. Jesus Man.
But
That's
it
right.
managed to somehow predict, as it were, the god-awful Let There Be Light Kevin Sorbo abortion by doing all the same tropes that movie did, but ahead of it, like if Airplane was made first.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, it was.
And and Basil, who lived in the 4th century, writes that since God is able to overrule the councils of princes and nations, as he did the advice of Achitophel, Christians who are threatened by these should appeal to the Lord for help.
Okay, that's just normal pastory stuff. They're not trying to pretend that the Bible was Jesus Bro all the time for realsies.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, whatever happened to Cinema Snob?
You know, he did a trailer review for a religious movie coming up. It's another one in the God's Compass variety. So we'll see. We'll see.
I'll have to
Hopefully he'll
go
get back to
check
them.
that out again.
He's the only reason I know about Revelation Road, where it's like if what was that apocalyptic in the desert Australian movie? Mad Max. It's a trilogy. It's like if Mad Max,
That's
but
great.
the Pureflix
Yeah.
version.
But Jesus, yeah.
But with Jesus, bro.
Is David A.R. White is that's the other thing too. He's always he owns the company and he stars in all of his own movies.
You know what? He starred in a movie with two Norrises, Chuck and Mike Norris, and he was the first one to throw a roundhouse kick. So
that's right.
What the fuck? Bells of Innocence.
Yeah, I was never a Chuck Norris fan, and then I heard that thing where he said that he wanted to tattoo God onto the forehead of every atheist, which I thought was ironic because Bruce Lee was atheist.
And Bruce Lee kicked his ass.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, so are we ready to move on to the next one?
Sure.
All right. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple donkeys saddled, carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruits, and 1 skin of wine. The king said to Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride. The bread and summer fruit are for the young men to eat, and the wine is for those to drink who faint in the wilderness." The king said, "And where is your master's son?" Ziba the king, "He remains in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will give me back to my grandfather's kingdom.'" Then the king said to Ziba, "All that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." Ziba said, I do obeisance. Let me find favor in your sight, my lord, the king." When King David came to Bahurim, the men of the family of the house of Saul came out, whose name was Shimei, son of Gera. He came out cursing. He threw stones at David and all the servants of King David. Now all the people and all the warriors were on his side and on his right and on his left. Shimei shouted while he cursed, "Out, out, murderer, scoundrel! The Lord has avenged all of you on the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, disaster has overtaken you, for you are a man of blood." Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head." But the king said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, 'Curse David,' who then shall say, 'Why have you done so?'" David said to Abishai and to all his servants, "Now my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite? Let him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has bidden him. It may be that the Lord will look upon my distress, and the Lord will repay me with good for this cursing of me today." So David and his men went on the road, while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him and cursed as he went, throwing stones and flinging dust at him, and farting in his general direction. The king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself. Did you want me to finish the chapter, Tomer?
Yeah, finish it.
Okay. Now Absalom and all the Israelites came to Jerusalem. Ahithophel was with him. When Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Absalom said to Hushai, Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend? Hushai said to Absalom, No, but the one whom the Lord and his people and all the Israelites have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. Moreover, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? Just as I have served your father, so will I serve you. Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, Give us your counsel. What shall we do? Ahithophel said to Absalom, Go into your father's concubines, the ones he has left to look after the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself odious to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened. So they pitched a tent for Absalom upon the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now, in those days, the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the oracle of God. So all the counsel of Ahithophel was esteemed both by David and by Absalom.
So
He was the best.
so kind of interesting how they are like, especially that last verse there about how this council of Ahithophel was basically considered to be like almost like an oracle of God. So definitely no political propaganda there. Anyways,
It's almost like they're excusing Absalom for doing what he did. It's like
Well,
saying
he
like
did get-
Absalom wouldn't have done that, but because
If not for
Ahithophel was seen as
Ahithophel.
such an important person.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. They're kind of acting like dogs. It's like dogs' highest pee wins, which is why in Family Guy Brian had to pee on the top of Everest. It's like the highest fuck wins. But I mean, it is playing into that trope that we already discussed of the new king takes the old king's wives.
Yeah, not just that, right? He's doing the same kind of thing that well, not the same kind of thing, but it's a play on what happened with David before when he saw one of his wives,
On
one
the
of his
roof.
future wives, right?
Bathsheba, yeah.
Yeah. So like he would see her on the rooftop. So now everyone is looking at Absalom.
Well, she wasn't on the rooftop. He was on the rooftop.
He was on the rooftop. Yeah. But now everyone is seeing him on this rooftop. And he's
No, go ahead.
Absalom, and he's
well, seeing the
his
concubines go
concubines.
into the tent.
Yeah.
And then there was.
Can I just?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you finish, Lawrence.
Yeah, my one other thought was so this pairing together of Shammai and the house of Saul and Absalom kind of being on one end, and then the house of David and everyone that's on his side on the other end. So very I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is. But it's just very tribalistic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is part of this this pretty pronounced northern polemic that runs right through the Deuteronomic history, right? Saul is always associated with the north. Absalom's rebellion is his rebellion is by association also connected to Saul in the north, right? So could I just read just a little bit here of some stuff that I've written about this particular story? So just starting from the beginning of chapter 50. I promise it's not long. Would that I were king. Absalom presumes the mantle of his father, remember, and he goes on to undermine David's capacity to govern by politicking with all the people. We're told that through savvy politicking and self-promotion, Absalom manages to win the support of the people, many of whom are probably not entirely enamored with the aggressive, warmongering philanderer David. Absalom proceeds to stage a coup. First, he usurps David's old capital at Hebron in 15:1-12. From there, he amasses enough support to drive David into exile, leaving behind only 10 of his concubines, the priests, in the Ark of the Covenant. Absalom enters Jerusalem and occupies the king's house. In a move similar to Amnon's own attempt to capture a woman from the king's house, which is part of what I think Amnon was doing by having sex with Tamar. Absalom, likewise, and more successfully, stakes his own claim on David's harem on the advice of one of the king's most reliable counselors and in full public view of the people, as we just read. It's interesting because in the story in 2 Samuel 14, or is it 13? Oh, sorry, 2 Samuel 12, Amnon cowardly performs his treason in a dark corner. That's literally what it says in the text. When he has sex with Tamar, it's in a dark corner. Whereas Absalom's act of conquest is in front of all of Israel, in front of the sun. According to an Old Testament scholar, Don C. Benjamin, the attention drawn by the writer, and I think this is pretty interesting too, the attention drawn by the writer to the number of these women in David's harem is a crucial feature of the story. Here's what he says. David's marriages to all of these women ratified the 10 major covenants on which David built his state. The Ark of the Covenant is David's legal claim to the land of Israel. The 10 wives are his claim to its children. So when Absalom enters the city, he publicly rapes David's wives to demonstrate that he is now the king of all of Israel, who will fulfill the terms of the covenants that the household of David has with their households. So Benjamin is suggesting that these women are at least representative of those 10 northern tribes, right? That would be the quote unquote that was essentially Omri's kingdom.
I could definitely see that, and associating Omri with with Absalom and attempting to, not overtly discredit, but, put it in the mind of the people that this is, an illegitimate usurper to the rightful heritage of David. I gotta say, though, I like Absalom better. Amnon rapes Tamar, tricks her. Absalom is like, bides his time, gets justice for her, is clever and calm. He performs a coup without a single drop of blood spilt at this point. He, gathers together. What is it? Lao Tzu said, the best battle is the one you do not fight. He gathers together enough forces. He, gets poor people. They will battle later, I know. But at this point.
Are you thinking Sun Tzu?
Sun Tzu. Yeah, sorry. I was thinking of Sun Tzu then. But the battle, the one you don't fight, he's gathered together popular support. He's gathered together military support. He's gathered together respected counselors. He's thinking, and, while not unwilling to fight, he's not unnecessarily just, blood and victims everywhere and everything. Like, he's way better than David.
Yeah, actually, Dave, Joel Baden has written a really good book on David. I would encourage everyone to read. It's a very, very readable book. But this is a point that he actually makes, was that Absalom's one and only mistake in all of this was the decision to go and meet David in battle. And he sees this as like sort of the part of part of the trope that's being developed here, that Absalom is the great politician and David is the great warrior. And when Absalom, attempts to take on that final piece to secure his kingdom, to best his father in battle, is ultimately his undoing. But I think this is a
Listening to the counsel of the double agent.
yeah, right. And ultimately, like, that's what I mean. If the picture that we're provided of David throughout these narratives has a semblance of reality to it, the picture that we have is of David, the warmongering tyrant, the guy who goes out and slaughters his enemies and achieves his kingdom through military force. So
And he's an absolute bastard about it too. Like, there's a long tradition in many cultures of, revering a warrior king who is noble and strong in battle. And to a certain degree, I can understand that. A great leader, one who is courageous and faces the fight at the fore where it must be taken, that is admirable. David is not that. He's a fucking absolute bastard. And like I pointed out with David and Bathsheba, Uriah the Hittite wasn't just some dude whose wife he stole. He was down with David in the worst time of his life, running for his life, pissing in desert caves. Uriah the Hittite was one of the men at his side. That kind of disloyalty, not just to rape a woman and kill her husband, but to do that to someone who was a fellow soldier at your lowest and most desperate point of your life, like, that is absolute scum, especially even from the perspective of that, the exalted warrior hero thing, the loyalty to your fellow brothers in arms. Even the worst soldier knows that you should always have loyalty to your brothers in arms that stand beside you in battle. And they still depict David violating that in a horrific way just because he's a petty bitch. Like, nothing about David is good. The fact that Saul asked for Philistine foreskins, they could have counted deaths with hands. They could have counted them with heads. Foreskins is the only way to make sure he wasn't killing Jews. Because the underlying bit of that is they couldn't trust David to not kill his own people if it was more convenient. It's a lot more work to undress everybody and cut off their foreskins than it is to just chop off the right hand of all the dead.
Okay, I'll start on verse 1. Anderson notes that the provisions listed here are reminiscent of those provided by Abigail in 1 Samuel 25:18. Tsumura notes that a pair of donkeys harnessed together can transport a heavier load than the same two animals loaded separately. Several Greek manuscripts have an ephah instead of each instance of 100. The Lucianic Recension has an ephah of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and Forky Samuel A has an ephah of fig cakes. On that same verse, cakes of figs, in Hebrew kites, literally summer. It is generally taken to denote a summer fruit, such as figs, according to Targum, Vulgate, and Bar-Efrat, dates, according to Septuagint, raisins, according to Abravanel, or otherwise unspecified, according to Ditrani and most modern commentators. Peshitta reads cheeses, which is a mistranslation. On verse 3, Anderson comments, it is difficult to judge whether Ziba's accusation of Mephibosheth was justified or not. David clearly regarded this as true, at least at this stage. Later, of course, Mephibosheth claimed that Ziba had slandered him in 1927. Nevertheless, it seems that David was not quite convinced by this protestation, although, quote, the chances of a lame man gaining the kingship at this point were very remote, end quote, according to Ackroyd. It must be noted that Mephibosheth had a son who by this time may have been nearly 20 years old. Compare 4:4 and 9:12. Therefore, the house of Saul had at least one fit potential candidate for the kingship. On verse 5, Shimei son of Gera. McCarter comments, Gera was a Benjaminite clan, Genesis 46:21, and it is sometimes supposed that the designation Ben Gera here indicates Shimei's membership in the clan of Gera, to which Ehud son of Gera in Judges 3:15 then must have also belonged. But Shimei seems rather to have been a Matchite. Gera, a short form of Ger and divine name, client of divine name, was a common northwest Semitic name occurring in Egyptian records of the 20th dynasty, in Phoenician, in Samaria Ostracon 30, and in Arad Ostracon 64. I assume then that son of Gera is simply what it seems to be, the patronymic of Shimei and probably of Ehud, not in this case a clan designation. End quote. Chazal in Talmud Berachot 8a and Gittin 59a taught that Shimei was Solomon's rabbi. Rashi, in his comment on verse 10, wrote that Shimei was the head of the Sanhedrin. On that same verse, he cursed as it came out. Shimei is cursing, in Hebrew, mekalel, 7 times in verses 5 through 13. Auld notes that Goliath also cursed David in 1 Samuel 17:43. The comparison between the two is strengthened by the talk of dogs in verse 9 and 1 Samuel 17:43, and pelting stones in verses 6 and 13 and 1 Samuel 17:49. He writes, quote, the very repetitiveness of the reference to Shimei's cursing over against the single mention of Goliath only underscores its inefficacy, end quote. He also notes that David kills Goliath with 1 stone, and Shimei throws many stones at David without success. On verse 7, murderer, scoundrel. In Hebrew for murderer is ish hadamim, literally the man of blood, according to, as we see in Septuagint and Vulgate. The term can be used to describe a murderer since he sheds a lot of blood, as we see in, according to Peshitta and Gersonides, but can also be used to describe any criminal, as we see in Psalms 5:7, which is 6 in the Old Testament, 26:9, Proverbs 29:10, etc. Anderson notes Nico A. van Uchelen's reading, bloodthirsty man, since in his opinion, quote, there is no hint at any criminal charge, end quote. Hebrew for scoundrel is ish ha-Belial, the man of Belial. The phrase son of Belial is attested frequently in the Hebrew Bible, with Belial describing something fiendish or monstrous. McCarter notes that it is used again in 22:5 to describe the netherworld, or underworld. On verse 8,
It's I was just gonna say, by the time you get to the Second Temple period, Belial is basically the Second Temple Jewish title for the devil or Satan.
And I was just thinking the man of blood, it'll be referenced later when Nathan tells David why he can't build the temple because his hands are too bloody, which is ironic coming from God, but there is definitely a recognition there.
And Tomer, I've waited almost 2 years for this. It's pronounced Van Uchelen, not Van Uchelen.
I thought it's Van. It's with an A, right?
Von?
I tried my hardest. Sorry.
It was just too much fun to let pass. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. On verse On verse 8, all the blood you shed in the house of Saul. It is not clear if this refers to Abner and Ishbosheth, according to Kimchi, Abravanel, and Tsumura, or to the 7 descendants of Saul whom David killed, as we see in 21 verses 1 to 14, which according to McCarter happened early in David's reign. He and Anderson suggest that even Saul and Jonathan were, to some extent, blamed on David, since at the time he had been a Philistine ally.
Or maybe he really did kill them and all of it was a retcon gloss, but whatever.
On verse 10, if he is cursing because the Lord said to him, curse David. Anderson comments, in David's view, Shimei was cursing him because Yahweh had told him to do so, and this is supported by David's interpretation of the dramatic events. If Shimei was referring to the deaths of the Saulites, described in 21 verses 1 through 9, then David was, in a way, responsible for the punishment meted out. Therefore, he submitted himself to Shimei's cursing, realizing, no doubt, that it was Yahweh who had, in some way or other, instigated the punitive action against the house of Saul. Consequently, David could only trust Yahweh's ultimate purpose, even though he did not understand the meaning of the present affliction. Thus, Shimei was no more than a mouthpiece of Yahweh, and therefore it would serve no purpose to kill Shimei, especially if he was accompanied by his kinsmen, 19 verses 16 and 17. On verses 11 and 12, McCarter notes Viola's opinion that these verses are, quote, a Deuteronomistic anticipation of the execution of Shimei in 1 Kings 2 verses 8, 44, and 45, end quote. He writes, however, that verse 12 looks forward to something good, quote-unquote, for David, not to a retribution on Shimei. He notes that these verses correspond in tone to David's reply to Abishai in 1 Samuel 26 verses 9 through 11. He writes, quote, both passages exhibit David's piety towards the God of Israel and forbearance in dealing with the house of Saul. Thus, they tend to strengthen his claim on the Israelite throne, and they belong, in all probability, to the earliest form of each narrative. The meaning of David's reply in the present passage can be paraphrased as follows. It is obvious from the circumstances of David's flight that he is now living under the impact of a curse. He is in exile from his home, and his own son has become his enemy. All this must reflect the divine will. It is hardly surprising, therefore, that Yahweh should put a curse against David in the mouth of a Benjaminite. Nor would it be proper or possible to change things by slaying Shimei. Instead, the attitude that David takes is one of patience and trust in Yahweh. He hopes for something good in return for the curse he must now endure. This evidently looks ahead to his restoration.
It's kind of like Saul, or Paul in Acts, how he's painted as all patient and noble, but when you read the epistles he wrote, he's actually just a narcissistic asshole ranting at everyone.
Yeah. They love doing that. There are so many. There are like a few times where he is saying something that's pretty reasonable, like stuff against boasting or stuff against hypocrisy, but then he's just being a fucking asshole all the time.
I know. It's like when Moses wrote that he was very humble, more than anybody else ever.
I'm the most humble.
I mean, if modern Trumpublicans can see him as this fulfillment of prophecy and noble giving idol that they've made, despite, anything and everything that's ever come out of his mouth or any action he's ever taken in reality, I think they can retcon David as nobly enduring his suffering, despite the fact that I call bullshit.
Okay, on verse 12, my misery. In the Masoretic text, the Ketiv reads my misery, in Hebrew be'avani or be'oni, and Kirei reads my eye, be'einai. Although most early translations follow the Ketiv reading, some rabbinical authorities see here an example of tikkun soferim, correction of the scribes, a correction of the text to preserve God's honor. Thus, Midrash Tanchuma B'Shelach 16 reads, the verse, it may be that the Lord will look on mine eyes, were amended by the men of the great synagogue, end quote. Following Zechariah 2:12, it claims that the original reading was in his eyes, be'eino. McCarter notes Saul Levin's opinion that both be'avani and be'eino are deliberate alterations of be'eino. Be'eini. Deliberate alterations of be'eino. Carmel McCarthy, however, takes the Ketiv reading to be the original. and writes in the Tikkunei Soferim, page 85, quote, accepting that the original reading is that preserved by the versions and the Ketiv means that the foundation upon which the Tikkunim tradition for this verse rests, that the Tikkunim tradition for this verse rests must be false. Consequently, as in the case of Genesis 18:22, this is another instance where later rabbinic traditions created a tikkun. Whatever the origin of the kirei, the difficulty it presented was already felt by the Targum, and it may have been this difficulty that prompted rabbinic ingenuity to look for another explanation. This they found in the phenomenon of the Tikkunei Soferim, particularly perhaps in the one which served as a point of reference on the lips of both Joshua ben Levi and Joshua ben Eli, namely Zechariah 2:12. Here was a ready-made parallel, for the original form there, a ni, or a nai, was corrected to a no, inspired perhaps by what happened in this verse of Zechariah. The supposed correction in 2 Samuel 16:12 was intended to avoid what would have been too anthropomorphic if it had been the original reading. On verse 14, and there he refreshed himself. Hebrew Bible, as well as most other translation, does not state where he refreshed himself. In Hebrew, vayinafesh sham. The traditionals like Rashi, Kimchi, Ditrani, and Apravanel wrote that he rested in Bachurim, based on verse 5. The Lusanic Recension and Josephus in Antiquities 7210 read at the Jordan. This reading is favored by McCarter, who writes that in the original text, El Hayarden, at the Jordan, preceded Ayefim, exhausted, and was lost in the Masoretic text by Homo Ioacton. He notes Juon's opinion of changing Ayefim to Ad Hamaim, to the waters. Anderson adds, quote, at the fords of the wilderness, reading Ad Averot Hamidbar, which he takes its omission as a scribal error. On verse 15, Absalom and all the men of Israel. Hebrew Bible literally reads, Absalom and all the people, man, singular, of Israel. The reading Absalom and the men, plural, of Israel is attested in the Septuagint and is favored by McCarter. Anderson notes Driver's observation that Kol Ha'am, all the people, is usually with David, while Kol Ish Yisrael, all the Israelites, are with Absalom. On verse 16, long live the king. Anderson comments, the exclamation, long live the king, is usually linked with the royal investiture. In our particular setting, it is not simply an acclamation, but perhaps it is equivalent to an elliptic oath, whereby a person, quote, places himself under the jurisdiction of the one of whom he refers in his oath, end quote. Of course, Hushai was either thinking of David, or, more likely, simply deceiving Absalom. On verse 21, Bar-Efrat comments, Achitophel's advice that Absalom will sleep with his father's concubines, whom he left to guard the house, indicates unrestrained moral depravity. The political meaning of Absalom's act, according to Achitophel, is a complete severance of relations, which is unrepairable, and from that, the strengthening of Absalom's supporters who are afraid of reconciliation between him and his fathers, as it happened after Amnon's murder. It seems that there is another political meaning to this. Taking the king's wives is equivalent to declaring the seizure of the ruling power. Compare Solomon's reaction to his mother's request that Abishag be given to Adoniah to wife in 1 Kings 2:22. End quote. Anderson, however, notes Wolfwine's opinion that it is unlikely that the takeover of the harem of the previous king legitimated the new king's claim to the throne. He writes instead that this cohabitation may have served as an indication that as far as Absalom was concerned, David was dead. He notes that according to biblical law, it is illegal for a son to take his father's wife, at least while the father is alive. As we see in Leviticus 18:8, 20:11, Deuteronomy 23:1, which is 22:30 in the Old Testament. Thus, quote, the deception may have strengthened the resolve of Absalom's supporters, since this final humiliation of David was deliberately public act, at least according to the narrator, end quote. And finally, on verse 23, Auld comments, The narrator rightly adds that advice given by this counselor, whether to the old or to the new king, has the force of a divine oracle. We may not be sure what the mechanics of the oracle are, but it does apparently settle matters. When David calls for Abiathar and the ephod, that deflects from himself the sore rage of his men in 1 Samuel 30. And even when his men questioned a first oracular response about tackling the Philistines at Keilah, they were satisfied when confirmation came in a second, 1 Samuel 23, verses 1 through 5. Achitophel's advice has no less force. Yeah, that's it.
Excuse my absence. Right after I finished reading that, one of my neighbors came and told me that one of my dogs had gotten out onto the roof of the shed and was trying to figure out how to get over the fence, but apparently has a fear of heights because of how high the fence had to be to keep Falcor in. So I had to go do a rescue mission.
Thank you for saving the floof.
Yeah. So I had to bring my Suburban out there and climb up on the roof of the truck so I could reach the dog. And then the dog was terrified of heights, and I have to carry the dog across the roof of the truck and all that. And then that took quite a little time. And then when I finally bring the dog back, and Tomir's still reading his commentary.
As is tradition.
No.
So let it be written. Although, if your dog is anxious, I mean, I would recommend CBD oil, but I live in a civilized country and we have that option. So.
Yeah. And this is a husky. I wouldn't want to, exacerbate whatever's already going wrong in their head.
No, it just chills them the fuck out. It's just
okay. All right. So are we moving on to 17?
Yeah, we can do that.
I would like that. Yes. Yeah. I wanted to finish
definitely.
3 chapters today.
Right. Who's reading 17?
I can do 17.
Okay.
Yeah, do that.
Moreover.
I love that word. Moreover.
Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Let me choose 12,000 men, and I will set out and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged, and throw him into a panic. And all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace." The advice pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel. Then Absalom said, "Call Hushai the Archite also, and let us hear too what he has to say." When Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom said to him, "This is what Ahithophel has said. Shall we do as he advises? If not, you tell us." Then Hushai said to Absalom, "This time the counsel that Ahithophel has given is not good." Hushai continued, "You know that your father and his men are warriors, and that they are enraged, like a bear robbed of her cubs in the fields. Besides, your father is expert in war. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now he has hidden himself in one of the pits or in some other place. And when some of our troops fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, 'There has been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom.' Then even the valiant warrior, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a warrior, and that those who are with him are valiant warriors. But my counsel is that all Israel be gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand by the sea for multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we shall come upon him in whatever place he may be found, and we shall light on him as the dew falls on the ground, and he will not survive, nor will any of those with him. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we shall drag it into the valley until not even a pebble is to be found there." Absalom and all the men of Israel said, The counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel, for the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring ruin on Absalom. I just want to say quickly, I hate the way Hushai talks. Just constantly with all these similes. So many. I fucking hate it. I'm going to continue though.
I assume it's a reflection of, what would be considered a skilled oration at the time it was written.
Yeah.
Which would very much depend on the norms, the linguistic norms of the time. So yeah, that doesn't always.
If I was there, I'd just be shouting "lame." He's fucking lame.
Well, obviously, Absalom shouldn't have fucking listened to this douchebag just because he blathers
he
on.
doesn't have that speech thing where he says nobody knows X as well as I do.
Yeah. I'm gonna continue on though. And then Hushai said to the priests Zadok and Abiathar, "Thus and so did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so I have counseled. Therefore send quickly and tell David, do not lodge tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means cross over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up." Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting at En-Rogel. A female slave used to go and tell them, and they would go and tell David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So both of them went away quickly and came to the house of a man at Bahurim, who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. The man's wife took a covering, stretched it over the well's mouth, and spread out grain on it. A stupid plan. And nothing was known of it. When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, "Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" The woman said to them, "They have crossed over the brook of water." And when they had searched and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. After they had gone, the men came up out of the well and went and told King David. They said to David, "Go and cross the water quickly, for thus and so has Ahithophel counseled against you." So David and all the people who were with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself. He died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Then David came to Mahanaim, while Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now Absalom had set Amasa over the army in the place of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. The Israelites and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Makir, son of Amiel from Lodebar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogalim, brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, meal, parched grain, beans, and lentils, honey and curds, sheep, and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. For they said, "The troops are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness." Few things, right? First of all, Ahithophel, what a response. That is just off himself.
Yeah,
After
it's a little
after his
reaction.
advice isn't taken. But like the thing is, you
I
kind
think
of
it's
get like the
isn't
blood
it
of the ego, right? Because like his counsel from before, like this counsel probably would have worked too, right? Like this plan would have worked. But
yes,
instead you got the double agent, and the thing is, even from before in the last chapter, like his counsel was as good as an oracle of God. So yeah, of course he's pissed off about that.
I'm divided though. Like, is this an immensely childish, infantile overreaction of someone who's like, you didn't take my advice once, I'm gonna kill myself, and then literally does? Or is this a wise man who goes, oh shit, I backed this guy because I like him, I want him to win, but now he's taking double crossing advice and he's going to get himself killed, and that means David's going to come after me because I am openly on his side and I'm screwed. So I might as well, one, die on my own terms, and two, not give him any excuse to come after my stuff and leave something to my children.
Yeah,
The way
I mean,
that
it is probably that. Yeah, the fact that he knows that, you know, once David wins this, he's you know, he's next on the chopping block.
And at least this
it also mentions that he was. It mentions that he's buried in his family's tomb, which could be like stressing that, you know, like, you know, he died. No, maybe not an honorable death.
Die in
but
his
he
own
wasn't,
land
like,
or something.
executed. Yeah, he wasn't executed and lost everything, right?
On that point, I think there may be a hint there on how early we can date some of these texts, because there are, if I remember correctly, so don't quote me on this, but I believe that within the city of Jerusalem there are only two larger periods of history in which people were digging stone tombs for their families. The first being like from the 8th to the 7th centuries BCE, and then the second being during the Hellenistic period. So it's probably likely you can't, as if we needed more data to show this, you probably can't date this text any earlier than the 8th century at the very earliest.
It says tomb, but like the Hebrew word kever, I don't think necessarily implies like a stone.
That's true.
To, just a family burial,
a family plot. Yeah, that's a good point.
I think there's like I can't remember if it's a Mishnah, maybe somewhere in the Talmud, where it talks about, I'm guessing, a much later practice of where people would have like a pit that you could go down into, and then there would be like shelves on the walls where actual bodies would be placed.
And the Romans did that in the catacombs. They did the same thing.
Well, not shelves, like, it was more like almost like a morgue style.
I think they're called ossuaries. Is it? No.
Yeah,
that's bone collections. I don't know if they also did that. Sometimes like you run out of space, so you take the body out and put the bones in a chest or something, and then you keep reusing the space.
Yeah.
That way.
I think the practice that they would be placed inside the hole for decomposition until it turned to bones, and then the bones would be placed elsewhere. To make room, basically.
There's a comment
that was just
here
in the
actually.
Hellenistic period, though.
Yeah, about hanging. I think it was Matt White asked a question about if there was a theme of hanging for greed, because, you know, Judas, and if that was like a trope being referenced here and potentially also in the New Testament. Although I wouldn't say it was greed, though. It seems more like treason, because David, of course, is the rightful king, and that's, you know, when your treason turns back on you, then you hang yourself, kind of a thing. I don't know. I don't know if it's
maybe based on the story, it was seen maybe because of the story with Absalom, it was seen as like, oh, getting hung is because you're a traitor, but it's not a prescribed death sentence in the Bible of hanging.
Although cursed be he that hanged on a tree, it seems it insinuates that there's some sort of trope or cultural association there that's not quite explicitly laid out, but has been kind of in the backs of people's minds for a long time.
Right.
Oh, you mean it's not a foreshadowing of Judas?
No, I'm sorry. Everything's about you, Jesus. It's not narcissistic at all.
And since you read that question, I'll read the other one. Jesus Tales says, yep, Jesus of Nazareth is built out of 3 Jesuses and 1 son of David from the Old Testament. Absalom comes to the New Testament through Zechariah, Psalms, 22, 23, verses 23 and 24, and directly from 2 Samuel, in my humble opinion, LOL.
LOL.
So he's Jesus, like the Jesus narrative, is built off of way more than just that. There
And
are
it depends. It depends on which version of the story you're reading as well.
that too, yeah. But like in total, like there are callbacks to Moses, David, some of the prophets. Like it's built
Yeah,
on
the
way
Elijah
more than
Elisha
just these.
cycles.
Yeah. Especially those, right? Like the healing of
That's
the sons.
that's a Lucan trope,
Yeah.
right? Pretty exclusive to Luke, actually, but yeah. So
Jesus
no,
is
it's
very tropey. He's very tropey.
Why are we talking about Lucan tropes? Who brought up werewolves?
Oh my god.
Jesus trope.
That's lycanthrope. No?
Oh, you know what? Someone do a Jesus as werewolf fan fiction. This is way more interesting. Come on.
He-
They did
he wasn't a
Abraham
zombie.
Lincoln Vampire Hunter. Well, yeah, I know, but we've already done zombie. We have to do something different.
He's a lich.
Is that word Greek derived, by the way? Lycanthrope? Is that Greek derived or Latin?
I thought it was Germanic.
Which was?
It might be, yeah. I don't know.
Which was?
Like the word that's for like lycanthrope.
Oh, lycanthrope is. That sounds more Latin than anything.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
I think so.
Oh wait, hold on. That's also in Greek. So
Yes.
yeah, there's lukos. So it would be if
Yeah,
we're going
because
from
lupus is Latin.
yeah, and then in English it became lichen from lukos. Sorry.
Okay. I'll start on verses 1 through 4. Auld comments, after his first success with Absalom, the sage counselor does not just wait to be consulted, but next offers practical help to lead a force in immediate pursuit of an exhausted David, frighten off his followers, and strike him down alone. Interestingly, Achitophel, though now in Absalom's entourage, is still calling David the king. To Absalom and the elders, his advice seems right: to be straight or level or right in someone's eyes. In Hebrew, vayishar hadavar be'einei is an expression used in both Samuel and Kings and in Chronicles, but only in portions additional to BTH. The elders of Israel featured in BTH at two key points: when David was invited to be their king in 2 Samuel 5:3, and when the ark was moved into the new temple in 1 Kings 8 verses 1 and 3. No role has been ascribed to them in Absalom's coming to power, 2 Samuel 15 and 16. Now, when David out of his capital, they figure as part of Absalom's council. On verse 3, the death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. Hebrew Bible literally reads, when all return the man that you are asking for. This meaning is difficult. Targum reads, all of them will come back after the man whom you seek will be killed. Likewise, Rashi wrote that this is a shortened verse, missing the verb killed, vayihareg, and reads, you will do what you want with him, and you will have him killed. Afterwards, all the people will have peace. This meaning is favored by Kimchi and Gersonides, but Abravanel renders, when all of Israel returns to the man you are looking for, that is David, so too in his death all of Israel will return to Absalom. Septuagint reads, as a bride turns back to her husband, you seek only the life of one man. McCarter and Anderson favor this reading, with McCarter noting Thenius' observation that the Masoretic text suffered further corruption through scribal error, reading bride, kala, as all, hakol, and echad, one, as asher, that you. He writes that Achitophel is making a metaphor describing David's army as a bride taken away from her new husband, who is Absalom. In due time, the bride will return willingly. Tsumura notes Barthelemy and Ehrlich's objection to this reading, since the text has ish, husband and man, while the normal word for bridegroom is chatan. He writes, however, that the noun ha'ish has been preposed to the word asher for emphasis, and that this clause, which is a noun clause used as an adverb, is inserted between the temporal phrase when everyone returns and the main clause all the people will be at peace. Bar-Efrat suggested that hakol shuv is a lithography of ve'ashiva kol, and I'll return all at the beginning of the verse, and so he reads, and I'll return all the people to you, for you are seeking one man, and all the people will be at peace. Vulgate reads, I will bring back all the people as if they were but one man, for thou seekest but one man. And Peshitta reads, I will bring all the people back to you, as every man whom you wanted returned.
It's giving, it is better for the people that one man die than that the entire nation should perish.
On verse 8, as fierce as wild bear robbed of her cubs. Such similes are also found in Hosea 13:8 and Proverbs 17:12. Bar-Efrat writes that this simile emphasizes the men's inabilities and striking fear into the reader's heart. Hushai emphasizes David's attributes to create a contrast against Achitophel's assumption that he is weak. Since Hushai cannot disprove this assumption, which is true, he puts against it the claim regarding the king's character. Septuagint reads, as a bear robbed of her young in a field, and as a savage sow in the plain. Unquote. This meaning is preferred by McCarter, who writes that this was omitted from the Masoretic text by haplography. Anderson, however, notes that many scholars doubt this reading. Peshitta reads, like a bear tearing its prey in the field. Likewise, Gersonides wrote that the bear's prey is called sechol, or shechol, and so reads, like a predatory bear. Shakul, sorry. On verse 11, from Dan to Beersheba. This phrase is taken as, quote, a sort of merismus which expresses a totality in a shortened form, end quote, according to Anderson, i.e., quote, the measure of the whole land, end quote, according to Auld, and appears elsewhere in 1 Samuel 3:20, 2 Samuel 3:10, 24 verses 2 and 15. McCarter writes that the description is evidence that not only Israel, but also Judah was involved in the revolt. Although he notes that some scholars take this description as political nostalgia, according to Auld, or a deliberate and theatrical exaggeration by Flanagan, he takes this phrase to be original. He writes that theoretically, Absalom can call up a huge army of tribal militia from both Judah and Israel.
This is where you get the argument in war over a quick, decisive action or a larger action that takes more time to put together. And because David is far more experienced in war, it would have been much better to hit him fast and hard while he's still on his back foot before he has time to like get all his ducks in a row. Because once he has his ducks in a row, he knows what he's doing. And you don't, even if you don't put together an army in an afternoon from all over Israel. Like that's just takes time.
On verse 12, as dew settles on the ground. There are no other instances in the Bible which use dew, tal, as a military metaphor. Abravanel suggested that this refers to the time when dew falls, i.e. at the sunrise. Thus, they'll descend when the sun rises. Kimchi wrote that like dew which covers all the ground, so too they'll descend over David and his people. Likewise, McCarter notes that Conroy called attention to the comparison of the cavalry of the Sons of Light to clouds or banks of fog in the War Scroll 12:9 and 19:12. Thus, the allusion is to the enveloping of the enemy by an enormous number of troops. On verse 14, the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Achitophel, etc. McCarter regards this clause as a parenthesis, which von Rad stresses as crucial to the interpretation of the succession narrative. Absalom's choice of the bad advice, quote-unquote, of Hushai was divinely ordained, and so the parenthesis, quote, shows once and for all what Yahweh has in mind, end quote. Auld comments, Yahweh's decision both supports and at least apparently negates the decision by Absalom and all Israel. In preferring Hushai, they achieve the right result. And yet, their argument is that Hushai's advice is better. But Yahweh's assessment is that Achitophel's policy is good. Are Absalom and his people doing the right thing, but for the wrong reason? Yahweh's own command gives effect to what David has wished when giving Hushai his instructions, that Achitophel's advice be cancelled or undone in 1534. The terms of David's own earlier wish of Yahweh has been that Yahweh would render foolish his old advisor's counsel in 1531. However, Yahweh demonstrates his own independence and sovereignty. He both recognizes the quality of Achitophel's advice and, despite that, cancels its effect. It is possible to judge that the one counselor's policy is good, but the other is better. Yet there is no question, as far as Yahweh is concerned, that Achitophel's counsel has been bad or foolish. It is not Achitophel who has been deluded by divine will, but rather all those who have heard his counsel, both leader and led.
Look, if I argue with you, I must take up a contrary position. See, Arn gets it.
No, you don't.
I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to argue unless you've paid.
Okay, on verse 17, En Rogel. Commentators take En Rogel to be modern Bir Ayub, or Job's Well, which is, quote, a spring southwest of the city of David in the Wadi Kidron, south of its junction with the Wadi Hinnom, end quote, according to McCarter. Targum and Peshitta read the Fuller's Spring. Van Stardan Solman writes that the fuller was, among other things, a washerman, and this part of his trade he executed by treating the textiles with his feet, in Hebrew regel, as explained by Rashi, Kimchi, and Ditrani. On verses 18 through 20, the story described here is reminiscent of the story of Rachab and the two spies in Joshua 2. In that story, Rachab hides the men on the roof of her house with stalks of flax. Here, they are hidden in a well with groats, quote-unquote. McCarter notes Van Seders' opinion that there is a direct literary dependence of the present narrative with that in Joshua. However, he writes he prefers Gunn's reading, that there is a traditional story pattern, though he doesn't see this as, quote, evidence that the primary reason for the composition of the larger story was entertainment, or that the story is a product of what Gunn calls oral traditional composition, end quote. He writes that this is a case of the influence of a traditional story pattern on the composition of an original literary work.
Trope's gonna trope. Sorry.
On verse 19, grain, in Hebrew, harifot. The word is also found in Proverbs 27:22, referring to something that is crushed by mortar and pestle. Most traditional commentators render ground wheat. Kara, however, derives the word from the root pei resh ein, to bare or uncover, and takes harifot to refer to the hair, i.e., she uncovered her hair and scattered it on top of the well. Likewise, Vulgate reads dry sudden.
Was
Vulgate
she just
reads,
laying there like a straw?
oh, I think it was
Just flinging her hair out. Oh, there's nobody here.
I mean, neither of these are really amazing options for like you know how if you dig like a trap in the woods, you put like leaves and shit on it because it blends in. Grain on a well or hair on a well, I don't know. I feel like the camouflage isn't amazing there.
She throws down a cover and then puts the. It looks like she's trying to like pretend it's a threshing floor, or I'm doing my
garden.
You know,
Yeah, I'm guessing it's implying that this was like a normal thing to, like, if you would want to dry out some grain or fruit or whatever, then you might use something like the well to do that.
Normally you wouldn't do it by the well.
Vulgate reads dry sodden barley and Peshitta barley grits. McCarter and Anderson follow Friedrich Schulthes's reading of charifot, a term for grains of sand added to barley, possibly for grinding purposes. Likewise, Hallott renders grains of sand. Other suggestions include the Lusanic recension, which reads cakes of preserved fruits, in Greek palathas. Josephus in Antiquity 7:2-6 reads layers of wool. Targum reads dates, reading harifot from haraf, new or fresh, with Talmud Yerushalmi teruma, I think. Talmud Yerushalmi teruma 4:6, taking harifot to be the first dates harvested in the season. And Vaticanus has dried arafoth. It's terumot, not teruma, sorry. I sometimes forget abbreviations. Okay, on verse 23, Bar-Efrat comments, after Achitophel saw that his advice was rejected and David managed to escape, he decided to end his life, since he estimated that David will win, and Achitophel will be sentenced to death as a traitor. Thus, he can at least manage the affairs of his house and be buried next to his father. The details regarding the donkey saddling, walking to his house, and writing his will portray Achitophel as a thoughtful and prepared person. His death benefits David, since if he was alive, Absalom could have garnered great benefit from his wisdom. End quote. Anderson notes that since Achitophel was buried next to his father's tomb, it can be assumed that no stigma was attached to suicide at this time. While later Jewish traditions condemn it, earlier writers make no explicit negative comments. He also notes that 2 Maccabees 14 verses 41 and 46 seems to imply that a righteous suicide may have a share in the future resurrection.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Later on,
but
that was
that's-
super important. The martyrdom motif really,
like
took off
you
in later
should
years.
kill yourself rather than worship idols, murder someone, or illicit sex, or whatever it's called.
Yeah, it received like another
Rape or incest.
within Judaism. It received another man, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of words today. It was kind of like that idea was kind of revived during the Crusades as well. Yeah, a lot of rabbis were telling their communities to kill themselves instead of dying by the hands of Christians.
It's interesting. Established religions have always had this very weird relationship with suicide, because you can't glorify suicide or everyone will just kill themselves to get to paradise, because, life sucks, which is why you sold your religion in the first place. But if you condemn all suicides equally, then even people in the most horrific circumstances, and then people are like, what the hell is wrong with you? Blah, 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 blah situation. What choice did they have? So having this like limited number of times wherein it is permissible for you to kill yourself in very specific situations, and then hoping nobody tries to orchestrate those situations so they can kill themselves to go to heaven.
And there is also an interesting note by McCarter. He writes, Matthew may have had the death of Achitophel in mind when he fashioned his report of the suicide of Judas in Matthew 27:5. Acts 1:18, obscure as it is, does not seem to allow that Judas hanged himself. The motifs of the betrayal, the son of David, and the ascent of the Mount of Olives are all there in Matthew. Gethsemane, where Jesus was betrayed, cannot have been far from the place on the slopes of the Olives where David stood when he learned that Achitophel had betrayed him, 15:30 and 31.
Is that true?
I mean, he says it.
It's on the east side of the city?
Did I?
Oh,
What's on
I'm
the
getting
inside of the
confused
city?
with
Sorry, I wasn't listening.
The garden of how do you say it? Gethsemane.
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 Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I think
thought it was
we're
on
asking
the west side.
Tomer if
Or is that
Gethsemane
Gehinnom
is
is
on-
on the west side?
No,
He
isn't
is the
Geh-
closest
isn't
to me.
Gehenna
I feel like the Via della Rosa
southeast?
is on the east side of the city, so maybe does that end in Gethsemane?
No, the Via Dolorosa would not end in Gethsemane. The Via Dolorosa would end on Calvary,
Right.
Oh.
wherever they've determined that is, depending on your cultic group.
And And that's the location of crucifixion, or
Yeah.
oh, okay. Oh, I see. Gethsemane is just like a separate thing. Right.
Okay, on verse 25, Jether and Ishmaelite. Hebrew Bible reads Ithra the Israelite. First Chronicles 2:17 has.
You've gone all roboty.
No, I think you probably have, Isaac.
Oh, is it just me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
No problem.
Okay. First Chronicles 2:17 reads, the father of Amasa was Jether the Ishmaelite. This reading is attested in Alexandrinus. Rava in Talmud Yevamot 77a said that he was called an Ishmaelite because he girded his sword like Ishmael and said, quote, whoever does not accept this halacha shall be stabbed with the sword, end quote. Yeah. Judaism by force, am I right? Kimchi wrote that Ithra was an Israelite who
Sorry,
resided...
what did you say?
I quoted Rava from Talmud Yevamot 77a, who said that Jether was called an Ishmaelite because he girded his sword like Ishmael and said, whoever does not accept this halacha shall be stabbed with the sword. Yeah. And I call it Judaism by force. Okay. Kimchi wrote that Ithra was an Israelite who resided in the land of Ishmael. He notes his father's opinion that when he was in the land of Ishmael, the people there would call him Israelite, and when he came to Israel, he would be called Ishmaelite. Vulgate and Codex Coecilianus read the Jezreelite, a reading preferred by Levinson and Halpern. McCarter, however, follows 1 Chronicles 2:17 and amends to Ithra the Ishmaelite. He writes that either Amasa was the illegitimate issue of a casual liaison, or more likely, he was the child of a special type of relationship, comparable to the tzadika marriage of ancient Arabs, according to which the woman remained with her children in her parents' home and received periodic visits from the man. Thus, he writes that Amasa's father was an Ishmaelite, but Amasa himself was a member of his mother's family, the house of Jesse. This reading is accepted by Anderson and Bar-Efrat. Tsumura notes Nadav Naaman's opinion that the gentilic Israeli is a variant form of Asrielite, which indicates that Amasa was, quote, a member of a neighboring Manassite clan located north of Ephraim's tribal territory, end quote. But Tsumura, however, writes that the Israelite was possibly supplied by the narrator in order to make it clear that Ithra has an Israelite background, despite his Aramaic-sounding name. He takes Yisraeli as a variant form of Israeli and Israelite. On that same verse, Abigail, the daughter of Nachash and sister of Tseruya. According to 1 Chronicles 2:16, Abigail was Jesse's daughter. Traditional commentators wrote that Jesse was also called Nachash based on Talmud Bava Batra 17a, which state that Jesse died without sin only because of the serpent's Nachash counsel. Kimchi notes his father's opinion that Jesse was called Nachash because out of him came asps who killed in the nations of the world, as is written in Isaiah 14:29, quote, from the stalk of a snake there sprouts an asp, end quote. I.e., from Jesse's stem, who was called Nachash, came an asp, i.e. Hezekiah. Likewise, the Lusanic recension reads, the daughter of Jesse. McCarter notes Herzberg's opinion that Nachash was the name of an earlier husband of Jesse's wife, to whom she bore Abigail and Tseruya. Some commentators, like Bar-Efrat, take the daughter of Nachash to be a mistake, probably influenced by son of Nachash from verse 27.
That seems a little more likely. You run into so many weird contortions when you have to pretend that the Bible couldn't possibly contain a mistake anywhere. Like, if you're just like, oh, they meant to, maybe they just, messed up this person's ancestry a little bit. Whoops.
Got some comments to catch up on. Matt White says, so the Old Testament characters knew the fruiting season of figs, but Jesus didn't. He should have studied his scripture. Then Furthausen offers $20, thank you, and says, can saved till the end of the can saved. Okay, well, I guess they want me to read it later. But we're very near the end of the stream, aren't we?
Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah. I have some comments, but yeah.
Okay, missed the live stream last week because I was traveling to Wrestle Dream. Lawrence, I don't know what that is.
I do.
Had question, but like always, Tomer answers before I can ask.
Yeah, I hope you had fun at Wrestle Dream. I only watched the main event, and honestly,
What is Wrestle Dream?
It was a pay-per-view for AEW. So the main event was Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley, and I honestly thought the ending was not amazing. It did not live up to Danielson versus Ospreay. It was good until, I don't know, the finish just didn't hit with me. But either way, I hope you had fun. This just came in. I think Ferdhausen would like this. The thing is, I explained this to the panel, the "I'm Your Mommy" shirt, and they're uncultured swine, so they don't fucking get it. But I think Ferdhausen would probably get it.
Yes,
I
we
was
are
in-
indeed uncultured swine because we don't follow the soap opera of men wrestling in their underwear, which is very straight, very heterosexual.
I was gonna say, you paid money for that, Lawrence?
It's multicolored rainbow spandex.
Damn straight I did.
I was in Florida for
an idea
Hurricane
for a new
Helene,
T-shirt,
and
Lawrence.
You what?
Sorry, you should get a new T-shirt design. I'm your daddy. Come and milk me.
That's a good one too. I know. I also recently got. I bought this when I bought a Bray Wyatt shirt as well. So
I was in Florida for Hurricane Helene, and while I was holed up, I watched the Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix.
Oh yeah,
it's very good.
Yeah, unfortunately, when it comes to the crazy part about the Vince McMahon documentary is that like those are basically just like open secrets in the wrestling community. Like everyone already fucking knew that stuff. Like that's the crazy part, that it wasn't like out there, like no new revelations. It's stuff that they've known for a fucking long time.
And then
my favorite part though is right at the beginning where he says, how does he puts it basically? He says, well, you know, I'm going to tell you a story, but you probably shouldn't believe it because it's mostly not true.
John Klein says, the almighty Tomer knows all and answers all your questions before you even ask. Hail Tomer.
It's because he's several time zones forward time in the future.
Hail.
You could say that, I guess. Okay. I was on verse 26. The Israelites and Absalom. Several commentators see a significance in the order presented here. As McCarter writes, quote, Mauchlin, or Mauchlin, I don't know, suggests plausibly that this emphasizes Absalom's decision to accompany his army, a point at issue in the counseling duel of Achitophel and Hushai in 1711. Conroy thinks it may imply an insult to Absalom. Kaspari supposes that Absalom at first stood here alone, Israel being added as seemed to benefit the word encamped. I think Kaspari's solution, which does not explain the odd word order, is backward. The original text said, Israel encamped, but since the identity of Israel in this material is apt to be ambiguous at times, some helpful ancients added, and Absalom. On verse 27, Bar-Efrat comments, Shovi, son of Nachash, from Rabath of the Ammonites, is probably the brother of Hanun, son of Nachash, king of Ammon, who insulted David's messengers when they came to comfort him over his father's death, and was probably beaten by David in battle. Machir, son of Amiel from Lodebar, is the man whom Mephibosheth was residing in his house before he was invited to come and settle in Jerusalem. 9 verses 4 and 5. Barzillai the Gileadite from Rogelim is Saul's son-in-law, assuming that he was identical with the father of Adriel, son of Barzillai the Machlathite, who married Merav, daughter of Saul. in 1 Samuel 18:19 and 2 Samuel 21:8. This assumption is strengthened by Mecholah, or Abel Mecholah, Adriel's origin, residing close to the land of Gilead. People with such status, therefore, were closely tied to Saul's royal house and to Ammon's royal house, and yet they lended their help to David. Finally, verse 29, cheese from cow's milk. In Hebrew, shvot bakar. The exact meaning of this term is unclear, since the word shvot is a hapax. Septuagint reads, safoth from cows. Yeah, because the Hebrew Bible is a translation of the Septuagint. Targum and Peshitta take it to mean cheese, with Kimchi explaining that it is derived from the root shin pei he, to rub, i.e. they were made by rubbing. Bar-Efrat notes that in rabbinical Hebrew, the root refers to pouring liquid from one vessel to the other without passing the sediment. Thus, in the process of making cheese, the whey is passed from one vessel to the other, and the solid cheese is left in the first vessel. Halot takes safot, or shafot, to mean a foodstuff such as hard cheese or curd cheese made from cow's milk. And Vulgate has fat calves. And I have possibly one Christian commentator, that is Casian, who lived circa 4th and 5th centuries. He writes, with the woman's deception of Absalom's servants as a case in point, the apostles charged to prefer the good of others over one's own well-being will undoubtedly necessitate lying on occasion.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Peter, there's someone who desperately needs to be permanently banned in the chat right now.
Yes, I mean there are
Yeah,
some
it's
that
gone.
needs to be banned.
The immediate.
Thank you.
I think it might
Much
be the same
appreciated.
person who has been in the chat on several accounts already.
Yeah. The
Yeah, there's
trying
a-
to get
But-
all the slurs in.
But I think it might. I think more mods might be a good idea.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just there's people that can be banned at our leisure, and there's people that need to get the hell out right now. And this was a case of the latter.
I'm done. I said that I'm done.
Okay. So I'm guessing we are not going to 18 today.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, then same bat time next week.
Yes.
All right. Any closing comments?
You know what?
Discord.
Yes, join the Discord. And also, just to subscribe to Milwaukee Atheists, you fucking bozos.
It's true.
That's damn true.
All right, and Tomer says he's going to join me tomorrow as we do we do the final part on talking about Joseph Smith, the King Follett discourse, which
Yeah.
I
I couldn't participate last time because it was the 1-year anniversary for October 7th, so I didn't feel like I wanted to do that.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, I'm going to appear there. I don't know what it is about, but I'll see.
Yeah, well, it's a good deal of Mormon theology that was written like right at the last minute as part of a eulogy, and Bryce Blankenagel says that Blankenagel says that this should have been part of the Mormon canon because there's a lot of people that follow this just from the eulogy. It's not in the rest of the scriptures that he wrote, or excuse me, that he didn't write. It
It was revealed to him. Yeah.
He translated with magic rocks from Reformed Egyptian, which is totes a thing for realsies.
Yep.
Right.
All right. Otherwise, good night, all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. See you in the Discord.
Bye.